What does a young woman of 22 do on the 11th month morning of her widowhood, when she's buried a husband she had loved without ever quite being in love with? When the great country house in which she had been 6 years married is the only home her 21 years has known, and when at 10:30 on a cold, pale blue Tuesday morning, the new Duke who has inherited the title, a man she has never met, of whom her late husband had only spoken once and briefly, is to arrive at the great door by his solicitor's letter, to take possession. She does what any young woman of 22 does, who has been brought up at a country rectory and married at 16 to her father's old Cambridge friend. She rises at 6. She dresses plainly in her widow's grey and black, in the soft, dove grey and black wool morning gown with its long sleeves and high black velvet trim at the throat, the white cap of fine lawn pinned smooth above her chignon, the thin black silk ribbon at her neck, the plain gold band upon her left hand. She breakfasts on tea and toast in the small east breakfast parlour. She walks once round the South Rose garden in her plain black wool stockings and her plain black indoor slippers, the gravel cold beneath them, the late roses spent and a faint mist in the box hedges. She speaks civilly with her housekeeper. She thanks her cook for the bread of 11 months' breakfast. She gives her last orders for the household. She sets out, upon the long polished walnut writing table of the South Library, the 4 neat folios of the estate accounts in her own clear hand, opened to the proper pages, the receipts laid in order between, the last of October's tradesmen's bills clipped together. She lays her gloved hand once upon the high-faded, ox-blood leather back of the wing-chair in which her late husband had read each evening of the 6 years of their marriage, and she does not weep. She straightens her widow's cap before the small oval looking-glass above the chimney-piece. She goes to the great door at 10:30. She stands at the foot of the stair. She waits. Mrs. Georgiana Penrose, née Broderick, 22, who had been married at 16 at her father's deathbed, wished to Sir Jonathan Penrose, Baronet of Penrose Hall in Northamptonshire, and widowed 11 months ago of a kind, quiet old husband who had stood instead of a father to her in his last 6 years. Penrose Hall is entailed. The baronetcy is extinct. The estate has fallen, by the strict construction of an old male line entail, to her late husband's distant maternal cousin, Lord Hugo Alexander Ainsworth, 4th Duke of Hertfell Park in Derbyshire, a man she had never met, whose late mother, whom she had also never met, had been laid in her own family vault at Hertfell 6 weeks earlier, and who is, by his solicitor Mr. Pendlebury's letter of the 17th of October, expected at Penrose Hall this Tuesday morning of the 28th of October, 1817, at 10:30 of the forenoon, to take possession. She had long, rich, dark, russet, wavy hair, of a deep, warm russet brown that took copper lights when the firelight caught it, pinned smooth in a low chignon at the nape, with small wisps escaped at the temples beneath the white widow's cap of fine lawn. Clear, soft, hazel-green eyes, warm autumn leaf brown shading to pale moss green at the edges, and dark gold flecked when a candle stood near, with thick dark lashes and a very steady direct gaze that did not falter at the threshold of any room. Her skin was ivory fair English, with a faint, warm rose flush across the cheekbones and faint freckles across the bridge of her nose, and a small natural beauty mark just above the right corner of her upper lip. The face was oval, the features delicate and fine, the mouth soft and well-shaped at composed quiet, the brows finely arched in dark honey brown, the neck long and graceful above the high black velvet trim. She stood slender and upright at 5'4". The voice, when she should presently use it, would be soft and warm and low alto. The small gold mourning locket on its thin black silk ribbon contained a curl of her late husband's silver-grey hair. The plain gold wedding band upon her left hand had been set there in the parish church of Broderick on a cold October morning of 1811 by the steady hand of a man already 56. The carriage came up the avenue at 25 past. She heard the wheels upon the gravel before she saw the team. She did not move from where she stood. The great door was opened by Mr. Roxburgh upon the stroke of half-past, and the cold, pale blue forenoon stepped into the hall behind two gentlemen, and the new Duke of Hertford came through the great door of Penrose Hall. Lord Hugo Alexander Ainsworth, 4th Duke of Hertford, of Hertford Park in Derbyshire, 34 years old, succeeded to the title on his father's death in May of 1815, was tall, 6'2", and lean and broad-shouldered, with thick, dark, walnut-brown wavy hair, deep, warm walnut brown that took bronze lights at the firelight, cut close at the nape and just brushing his coat collar, with one premature streak of pure silver above the right temple and one lock fallen across the brow. His eyes were clear and cool storm blue, the true cool slate of an English channel under cloud, with small flecks of dark gold when the light came near, and thick dark lashes, and a steady, considering gaze. His skin was fair and faintly weathered from country riding, clean-shaven, with a small, thin, pale scar high above the left brow. Got at the age of 27 from a fall on a slate roof at Hertford when he had gone up to bring down a kitten, and a small dark mole at the right corner of the lower lip beside the firm, grave mouth. The face was strong and angular, high cheekbones, a straight Roman nose, a strong, clean-edged jaw. His voice, when he should presently use it, was deep and clear and quiet baritone. He wore a dark charcoal, superfine country travel coat, a black silk waistcoat with small silver buttons, black breeches, brown-topped boots of soft leather, a white cravat properly tied, the heavy silver Hertford ducal signet ring, 3 sheaves of wheat over a stone bridge. On the right hand, he carried a plain dark brown beaver hat in his right hand. A band of black crape was tied close at his left arm. Beside him stood Mr. Pendlebury, his late father's family solicitor, and now his own, a man of 49, with thinning silver-grey hair, carefully combed back from a high pale brow, steady grey eyes behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, fair indoor pallor, a long narrow scholar's face, clean-shaven, tall at 6 foot, thin with a slight stoop. He wore plain black superfine, a white cravat, a black silk waistcoat, charcoal pantaloons, polished black shoes. He carried in his arms a leather-bound client's ledger and a small black leather travelling deed box. Mr. Roxburgh, the butler at Penrose Hall, a man of 60, with thinning, silver-grey hair brushed back, pale blue eyes finely lined, fair pale indoor skin, a long kind face clean-shaven, tall at 6 foot, thin and upright, in his plain black butler's tailcoat, white cravat, black silk waistcoat with small gilt buttons, charcoal pantaloons, polished black shoes, with the small black silk mourning band at his left arm that had been there 12 months for his late master, received them at the door, took the hat and the greatcoats with the practised grave courtesy of 40 years, and asked whether his Grace would be pleased to be shown through. His Grace inclined his head once. Mr. Roxburgh turned and led the way across the hall and through the double doors to the great drawing-room beyond. The great drawing-room of Penrose Hall faced south upon the rose garden. Its walls were hung with pale cream silk paper that had aged to the soft, warm cream of old vellum. A marble chimney-piece of plain English design carried a small, steady fire of beech logs. 3 tall sash windows gave upon the south rose garden, where the late roses stood spent in the cold, pale blue light. 2 faded ox-blood leather wing chairs, a deal worn at the arms and wings, had been drawn close together upon the hearth-rug. Between them and the windows stood the long, polished walnut writing table, and upon its centre, in their accustomed neat order, lay the 4 folios of the estate accounts, opened to the proper pages, with a small silver inkstand at the nearer end. She received the new Duke and his solicitor with composed gravity at the foot of the wing chair nearest the hearth. She did not curtsy deeply. She made the small grave inclination of a country gentlewoman in mourning for a man of her own house. She begged his Grace and Mr. Pendlebury to be seated, and indicated the long writing table with one quiet movement of her gloved hand. She had spent the last hour that she might place those folios so that any man of plain understanding could carry the estate forward without one question of her own at the seam. The new Duke did not at once go to the table. He stood for a moment near the hearth, and his cool, storm-blue eyes went once across the room, across the pale cream silk paper, across the small, steady fire, across the long writing table with its 4 neat folios, across the wing chair upon which a young widow's gloved hand had so lately rested, and then came back to her face. He spoke for the first time within those walls, and his voice was deep and clear and quiet, a careful baritone shaped at Eton and at King's, and at 15 years of Derbyshire weather. "Mrs. Penrose," he said, "I thank you for receiving me. May I beg the favour of a private word with you before any business of the estate is gone into?" She inclined her head once. "As your Grace shall wish." He turned half toward Mr. Pendlebury. The solicitor, who had read his master well for 29 years, had already laid the leather-bound ledger and the small deed-box upon a side table by the door, and was withdrawing without a syllable. Mr. Roxburgh, standing yet at the doorway, opened the smaller side door to the estate-room with his silent hand, and the solicitor passed through and was gone. And the side door closed, and there remained in the great drawing-room of Penrose Hall the new Duke of Hertford, the young widow Penrose, and Mrs. Ainsley, the housekeeper attendant, by the principal door. Mrs. Ainsley was a woman of 55, of soft, mid-brown hair, shot with grey, pinned beneath a small white linen housekeeper's cap, clear hazel kind eyes, fair pale indoor skin, a soft well-shaped mouth at composed quiet, of medium height, 5'5", and upright. She wore a plain, dark bombazine housekeeper's gown, with a white linen apron. The chatelaine of the household keys at her waist, plain black leather shoes, and a small black silk mourning band at her left arm. She had loved her young mistress for 6 years. She stood now with her hands folded before her apron, and her eyes upon the floor, and her quiet attendants proper to the room, and she did not move. The new Duke crossed to the long writing table, but he did not at once seat himself. He drew from the inner breast pocket of his dark charcoal coat a folded paper of cream-laid sheet, of 3 leaves still bound by their black silk thread, and a wax seal, pale red wax, broken upon the outermost fold, and he laid it for one moment upon the polished walnut beside the 4 neat folios. Then he raised his cool storm-blue eyes to the young widow's clear, soft, hazel-green eyes, and he said, in the same deep, clear, quiet baritone, "Mrs. Penrose, this is a letter of my late mother, Lady Caroline Ainsworth, Dowager Duchess of Hertford, of whose laying in the family vault at Hertford on the 15th of October you will perhaps have heard. The letter is dated the 14th of September last, and was written 6 weeks before her own death, and I had never seen it until last night. I found it, sealed as you see it lately broken, in a locked rosewood writing cabinet which I had not before opened. It concerns yourself. It was written to me, but I have read it twice, and I am persuaded that I cannot in honour proceed to one further word of estate business with you, until I have read it to you also. May I beg your leave to read it aloud?" She had not moved. She stood beside the wing-chair, and her gloved hand rested still upon its faded ox-blood leather back. She inclined her head once. "Your Grace may read it." He gestured to the wing chair. She seated herself in it, upright, her hands folded composedly upon her lap. He did not seat himself. He stood by the long writing table, and he turned the cream-laid sheet to the proper light, and he read the letter aloud in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, and his careful voice did not shake, though it slowed twice. Hartfell Park, the 14th of September, 1817. My dearest Hugo, there is a small matter pressing upon my mind, which I have these 3 months put off, in the hope that I should grow strong enough to speak it to you face to face. But as the sharp influenza of the spring has not quite gone from me, and as my chest is troublesome, I shall set it down now upon the paper, and shall lay it among my private papers, that if it should fall out that we have not the conversation, you shall yet have the words. I had a letter last week from Maria Sefton in town. She told me that the young Penrose widow, Mrs. Georgiana Penrose, had been left alone at Penrose Hall these 8 months, and that the estate is entailed upon you in default of male issue of poor good Sir Jonathan, and that no provision had been made for the lady, who is, Maria writes, of 22 and of no near family living. My dear son, I beg you to hear what I am about to set down. In October of 1794, when your father, then but lately the 4th Duke, had been at his most stretched of any year of his life, and when I was 6 months gone with your sister Sophie, and lay much in my chamber, your father went up to his old Cambridge friend, Sir Jonathan Penrose, and Sir Jonathan, without one word of question, and without one note of obligation upon the paper, made over to him the sum of £400. The loan was never claimed back. I knew of it then. I saw the cheque written. I have never told you nor your sister of it. Sir Jonathan was, in that hour, the saving of our house. I have these 23 years carried the obligation, and I have never had the means or the occasion of repaying it, and I shall now go to my account without having repaid it, and I am ashamed. Hugo, on my name as your mother, and on the small obligation to Sir Jonathan unrepaid these 23 years, I beg you, when in the proper course of things the entail shall fall to you, that you shall not turn the young widow Penrose out of her house. I beg you to ensure that she shall have shelter at Penrose Hall for as long as she might wish to remain there, on her own terms, and that she shall be treated by you and by every member of your household and by every officer of the estate with the full mistress of the house respect she has earned in 6 quiet years of marriage to a kind old man. Whatever the law shall say of the entail, I beg you to remember that what we owe is a great deal older than the entail. If you find this letter after I am gone, ride to Northamptonshire, my dear son. Do not write. Go yourself. Speak to the lady. Tell her plainly what I have here written, that she may know it is no charity of yours, but the small late repayment of an old obligation of mine, and then leave the decision wholly in her hands. Your ever-loving mother, Caroline. He came to the close of the letter. He folded the 3 leaves once more along their crease. He laid the letter open upon the long polished walnut writing table, beside the 4 neat folios, and he set his hand for one steady moment flat upon the paper, and then drew it away. He did not at once speak. He raised his cool storm-blue eyes and looked across the table at her. The young widow had not moved. Her gloved hands rested folded upon the lap of the dove-grey and black wool gown. Her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes were quite steady upon his face. The small natural beauty mark above the right corner of her upper lip caught the cold, pale blue light from the south windows. One small wisp of dark russet hair had escaped at her temple beneath the white widow's cap of fine lawn. She did not weep. She did not flinch. She sat composed in the wing chair, as a young woman of 22 sits, who has heard, from the lips of a man she has never before met, the substance of a kindness done by her late husband 3 years before her own birth. He stood by the long writing table, and he spoke the sentence he had written through 3 times in the night, and once more in the post-chaise that morning between Northampton and the lodge gates, and he spoke it now, without one paper before him. Mrs. Penrose, I have not come to evict you. I have come to ask you, in my mother's place and in my own, to remain at Penrose Hall as its mistress for as long as it shall suit you, on the same terms upon which my late cousin, Sir Jonathan, kept you, with the addition of every proper independence the estate can afford. The decision is wholly your own. Take what time you wish. The cold, pale blue forenoon held its breath for one small, composed silence. The fire of beech logs settled once, with the small, dry sound of a single coal. Mrs. Ainsley by the door did not move. Mr. Roxburgh in the hall beyond the great oak doors did not move. The young widow Penrose, in her wing-chair beside the hearth, lifted her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes once more to the cool, storm-blue eyes of the new Duke, and she answered him, and her voice was, as he had been told it would be, soft and warm and low alto, and very steady. Your Grace, your mother does me an honour I had no claim upon. I shall remain at Penrose Hall on the proper terms of the late settlement with no addition, the kindness of which her ladyship wrote, and which she did me the dignity of remembering, was none of mine. It was my late husband's. I shall keep his house in good order, until his Grace shall require it for some other use. He inclined deeply, with the slow, grave inclination of a man who has been answered upon his own ground by one fully his equal in composed self-command. He did not speak again at once. He went quietly to the side door of the estate-room, and he rang the small brass hand-bell on the side table, and Mr. Pendlebury came back through with the leather-bound ledger and the small black-leather travelling deed-box in his arms. The proper notes were made at the long writing-table. The 4 neat folios were gone over leaf by leaf. The new Duke declined, with a quiet word and a short bow to Mrs. Ainsley, to take rooms in the great house. He and his solicitor would, he said, lodge at the village inn the Penrose Arms upon the green at the foot of the avenue, that Mrs. Penrose's household should not be put out of its accustomed order by any guest of his on this day. They departed at 3. Mr. Roxburgh saw them to the great door, and watched the post-chaise turn the lodge gates, and was a long moment closing the door. The young widow Penrose sat at the long polished walnut writing-table, with the 4 neat folios open before her, and her late mother-in-the-spirit's letter still lying open at her left hand. She did not weep. She read the letter through once more in the silence. She spoke once to Mrs. Ainsley, very quietly, and said only, I shall not want anything more, Ainsley. I thank you. Mrs. Ainsley inclined her head, and gave her young mistress one small, private smile that was not seen by any other in the house, and went away, and closed the door. The cold, pale blue Northamptonshire afternoon came in through the south windows, upon the long, polished walnut, upon the 4 neat folios, upon the cream-laid sheet with its 3 leaves and its broken, pale red wax. She laid her gloved hand once again upon the high, faded, ox-blood leather back of the wing-chair in which her late husband had read each evening of the 6 years of their marriage. She did not weep. She left the south library by the side door, and she went up by the back stair. The Penrose Arms stood at the corner of the village green, a low brick coaching inn of the Northamptonshire kind. The Tuesday evening was come down cold and clear. A single lamp had been lit in the small parlour at the back, and a fire of seasoned beech burned upon the hearth. Mr. Pendlebury, the Hartfell family solicitor, 49, his thinning silver-grey hair carefully combed back over a long, narrow scholar's face, his steady grey eyes behind small, gold-rimmed spectacles, sat at the small writing-desk in the corner with the leather-bound client's ledger at his left elbow and a fresh sheet of cream foolscap before him. His tall, thin frame stooped a little to the work. The fourth Duke of Hertford, 34, his thick, dark walnut-brown, wavy hair, somewhat disordered by the cold ride and the silver streak above the right temple showing clearly in the lamplight, sat at the round oak table beside the window with a separate sheet before him. He wore the black silk waistcoat with the small silver buttons over a white linen shirt, the black crepe mourning band upon the left sleeve, the Hertford ducal signet, heavy silver, 3 sheaves of wheat over a stone bridge, caught the lamplight as his hand moved. His clear, cool, storm-blue eyes were lowered to the tracking of his pen. He had thought, at the great writing table of the South Library that morning, that he had said all that ought to be said. He found now that the saying of it required, beyond the speaking, the proper paper. "Madam," he wrote, "pursuant to the conversation we had the honour of holding this morning at Penrose Hall, and confirming the arrangement upon which you were so good as to accept the late Sir Jonathan's settled terms unaltered, I send herewith, by the hand of the inn's boy upon the morning, the proper instrument drawn this evening by Mr. Pendlebury, that you may have it in your keeping should any later need of reference arise. I remain, Madame, your obedient servant, Hertford." He read it through once. He folded it. He set it aside. Mr. Pendlebury, having drawn the proper paper at length upon the foolscap with the careful exactitude of his calling, rose and laid the document beside the letter. The Duke nodded once. Mr. Pendlebury sealed both papers with plain red wax pressed by the Hertford signet, and carried them down to the innkeeper's wife, with the request that the inn's boy take them up to Penrose Hall at first light. The boy did so the following morning at 7. Mr. Roxburgh received them at the great door. The papers were upon the long writing table of the South Library at 7:30, beside the 4 neat folios. Wednesday morning broke pale and cold. The household at Penrose Hall went about its work with the quiet exactness of a household that had only narrowly come through a thing it had feared. Mrs. Ainsley, the housekeeper, 55, her soft, mid-brown hair shot with grey, pinned smoothly beneath the small white linen housekeeper's cap, the chatelaine of household keys at the waist of her plain, dark bombazine gown, the white linen apron crisp at her front, and the small black silk mourning band upon her left sleeve, walked the corridors of the upper floor with her clear hazel eyes attending to every small thing. She was medium 5'5", upright, her soft, well-shaped mouth at composed quiet. She had received the bride at the great door in October of 1811, a girl of 16 scarce out of the schoolroom, and had loved her young mistress through 6 years. On the Tuesday morning she had feared, with a fear that had set a small tremor in her steady hand, that the new Duke was come to put her young mistress out of doors. He had not. Mrs. Ainsley had heard the result from Mr. Roxburgh at the half-hour before noon. She had drawn a long, careful breath. She had not wept. Now, on the Wednesday at noon, when Mrs. Penrose came out of the South Library, with the 4 neat folios under her arm, Mrs. Ainsley stood at the foot of the back stair, with her keys at her waist and her hazel eyes lifted. Her young mistress was come past her along the corridor, slender 5'4" upright in the plain dove-grey and black wool morning gown, with the high black velvet trim at the throat, the white widow's cap pinned over the low chignon at the nape, the small gold mourning locket on its thin black silk ribbon, the plain gold wedding band on the left hand. The clear, soft, hazel-green eyes met Mrs. Ainsley's hazel eyes for the briefest of seconds. Mrs. Ainsley did not speak. She gave her young mistress, in passing, a small private smile, not the smile a housekeeper gave a mistress in the regular way of duty, but the smile of a woman 55, who had loved a girl for 6 years and who had feared, on the Tuesday morning, to lose her, and who had not lost her after all. The smile reached her clear hazel eyes and the corners of her soft, well-shaped mouth, and lasted not above the second. It was given. It was received. It was over. Mrs. Penrose inclined her head a quarter inch and went on along the corridor. Neither lady spoke. Neither lady needed to. The Duke called at the great door of Penrose Hall at 9:30 on the Thursday morning, the 30th of October, with Mr. Pendlebury at his elbow. He sent in by Mr. Roxburgh his card and a brief courteous line. He begged leave to inform Mrs. Penrose that he and Mr. Pendlebury were taking the Morning Post to London upon the matter of his late mother's last papers, and that he should be from Northamptonshire some 10 days. He did not sit. The whole of the call, conducted upon the gravel of the carriage sweep, was the business of a quarter hour. The post-chaise moved off down the avenue at the quarter hour before 10. Mrs. Penrose watched the carriage go from the small square panes of the south window. She set her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes back upon the open page of her book. She read on. The town-house in Berkeley Square was cold when they came to it that evening. The Duke worked through the Friday in the methodical way of a man who would rather have the thing done. On the evening of Friday the 4th of November, having concluded the worst of the small papers, he took down a fresh sheet of cream-laid paper in his late mother's writing cabinet and wrote in the clear, strong hand of a man who chose his words for their plainness, "Madam, I have the honour to address you from Berkeley Square upon the Friday evening of the 4th of November. I trust that this letter shall find you in such good health as the season permits, and that the household at Penrose Hall stands in the quiet order in which I left it. I write upon a small parish matter only. There was, upon the standing list of charities kept by my late cousin Sir Jonathan, and laid before me by Mr. Roxburgh upon the Tuesday morning, an annual provision of coals to the parish poor of Penrose village, paid out at Michaelmas, and continued through the winter as the cold should require. I beg you, madame, in the matter of the parish coal, and in any like matter that may arise upon the standing list, to take a free hand exactly as it shall please you, and as my late cousin had laid it down. I have the honour to be, madame, with every proper respect, your obedient servant, Hartfell." He read it through twice. He folded it. He sealed it with the Hartfell signet and the plain red wax. He directed it. He sent it by the night post. It came to Penrose Hall at the second hour of the Saturday afternoon. The 5th of November, Mr. Roxburgh brought it up to the South Library upon the small silver salver. Mrs. Penrose set down Persuasion upon her knee, broke the wafer, read it through once and once again. She rose. She went to the long writing table at the south window and took down a fresh sheet of cream-laid paper. She wrote in her steady, fine hand at the careful pace of a woman who had been taught at 15 by a country rector to write a proper letter. "Your Grace, I have the honour to acknowledge the receipt of your letter of yesterday from Berkeley Square. I am very well, I thank your Grace, and the household stands in its proper order. Upon the matter of the parish coal, I beg to inform your Grace that I have continued the provision exactly as my late husband had laid it down, with the addition of no more than the ordinary increase that the colder week shall ask. The first waggons went down to the village upon the Friday afternoon, under the eye of Mr. Roxburgh, and the parish list shall be worked through in the same careful pattern through the winter. I have nothing further to ask of your Grace upon any account, and beg leave to remain, with every proper respect, your Grace's obedient servant, Georgiana Penrose." She read it through once. She sealed it with a plain wafer. Mr. Roxburgh sent it by the same night post. It was at Berkeley Square upon the Sunday afternoon. The Duke read it standing at the south window. He folded it. He set it inside the inner pocket of his black silk waistcoat. He did not write again. The post-chaise of the morning of the 12th of November set the Duke and Mr. Pendlebury down at the door of the Penrose Arms at the half-hour after 1. The innkeeper, who had had the rooms made ready upon the receipt of a brief line by the Monday's post, gave them again the same plain, whitewashed bedchambers above the small parlour. The Duke wrote a single line. "Mr. Roxburgh, His Grace the Duke of Hartfell is returned to the Penrose Arms this Wednesday afternoon, and shall do himself the honour of calling upon Mrs. Penrose at 11 of the Thursday morning, if it shall be agreeable. Hartfell. The inn's boy carried it up before 3. Mr. Roxburgh sent down by the same boy. Mrs. Penrose shall receive his grace at 11 upon the morning. Roxburgh. The Thursday morning broke cold and pale. The Duke walked up from the village under a thin clear sky, his thick dark walnut-brown wavy hair brushed back from the high pale brow under the plain dark brown beaver hat, the silver streak above the right temple showing in the morning light, the small thin pale scar above the left brow scarce noticed. He wore the dark walnut-brown country morning coat over the black silk waistcoat with the small silver buttons, the buff breeches, the brown-topped boots, the white cravat properly tied. The black crepe mourning band was upon the left arm, the Hartfell ducal signet upon the right hand. Tall, 6'2", lean, broad-shouldered, he came up the South Avenue at the careful pace of a man who had reckoned the half-mile to the minute. Mr. Roxburgh, 60, his thinning silver-grey hair brushed back from the long, kind face, his pale blue eyes finely lined with the patience of 40 years of service, his fair, pale indoor skin clean-shaven, tall 6 foot, upright and thin, in the plain black butler's tailcoat, over the black silk waistcoat with the small gilt buttons, the white cravat, the charcoal pantaloons and the polished black shoes, the small black silk mourning band on the left arm for the late Sir Jonathan, opened the great door at the 11th stroke of the long case clock. He inclined. He took the Duke's hat and gloves and laid them upon the side table. Your Grace. Mr. Roxburgh, I trust I see you well. Your Grace is very kind. I am very well. I thank your Grace. Is Mrs. Penrose at home? Mr. Roxburgh inclined a quarter inch. Mrs. Penrose is at home, your Grace. Mrs. Penrose is in the South Library at her morning reading. The Duke considered this for the breath of a second. I beg you, Mr. Roxburgh, show me through to the South Library. Very quietly. Your Grace. Mr. Roxburgh inclined again. He turned and led the way along the panelled corridor in the soft, careful step of a butler trained in his youth to walk a great house without sound. They came to the South Library. Mr. Roxburgh laid his hand upon the brass handle, turned it without sound, opened the door an inch and drew back. The Duke stood in the open doorway. The South Library was a long, low room of pale oak panelling, 2 south windows, a small fire on the hearth, the long writing table at the south window, and the 2 wing chairs drawn close to the fire. Mrs. Georgiana Penrose, 22, sat upright in the right-hand wing chair. The morning light crossed the long, rich, dark russet, wavy hair, pinned smooth in the low chignon at the nape, with the small wisps loosed at the temples beneath the white widow's cap of fine lawn. The firelight drew up deep copper lights in the russet. Her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes were lowered to a small cloth-bound persuasion, open upon her knee. The ivory-fair English skin showed the faint, warm rose flush at the cheekbones, the faint freckles across the bridge of the nose, the small natural beauty mark just above the right corner of the soft, well-shaped upper lip. She wore the plain, high-waisted, dove-grey and black wool morning gown with the high black velvet trim at the throat. The small gold mourning locket lay on its thin black silk ribbon at the long graceful neck. The plain gold wedding band was on the left hand, laid composedly upon the open page. Slender 5'4", she sat upright as she had been taught to sit at 15. She was reading aloud to herself in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, the cadence of the sentences kept as easily as breath. She finished a chapter. She turned the page. She had not heard him. He stood one breath in the open doorway, his clear, cool, storm-blue eyes upon her. He spoke from the doorway, in the deep, clear, quiet baritone that did not lift above the low note of the morning. Mrs. Penrose, I had not intended to interrupt. May I sit? She lifted her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes from the open book. The gaze was very steady. The rose flush at the cheekbones did not deepen and did not retreat. She inclined her head a quarter-inch, the same quarter-inch, the same composed dignity that she had given him at the foot of the stair on the Tuesday. Your Grace, the chair opposite, if it shall please you. The Duke crossed the long room at the careful proper pace, his brown-topped boots making no sound upon the soft Persian rug, and came to the wing chair opposite hers. The chair was the chair that had been Sir Jonathan's. The leather was darkened at the arms where the late Sir Jonathan's hands had rested through 6 years of evenings. The Duke paused one breath before he sat. The breath was acknowledged on both sides without speech, by him that he was come into a chair that had been another man's and that the other man's place was honoured, by her that the courtesy was perceived. He sat. There came at the door the quiet, low word from Mr. Roxburgh in the corridor, and a small, gentle step. Lizzie Wren, the lady's maid, 19, her soft, mid-brown hair pinned in a neat low bun beneath the small white lace cap, her clear hazel eyes lowered, her fair, lightly freckled skin and oval face showing the kind, quiet mouth, slender, 5'2", upright in the plain dark grey print cotton lady's maid gown, with the white linen apron and fichu, the small jet cross on its black silk cord, the plain black leather slippers soundless upon the rug, came in at her mistress's nod. She took the upright cane chair by the door, sat, threaded her needle, and began the quiet stitching of a hem. Mrs. Penrose did not look up at the maid. She set her hazel-green eyes back upon the open page of Persuasion and resumed the chapter from the line at which she had turned. She read in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, neither faster nor slower than she had been reading to herself. The Duke set his clear, cool, storm-blue eyes upon the small fire upon the hearth. He listened in the steady, considering gravity that was his own. The silver streak above the right temple showed a little in the firelight. The small dark mole at the right corner of the lower lip did not move. He did not look at her. The reading lasted an hour. At the 12th stroke of the long case clock, Mrs. Traherne, the cook, 50, her soft grey-brown hair pinned beneath the large white linen cap, her warm pale blue eyes, her fair pink-cheeked round face and kindly mouth, medium 5'5" and plump in the plain dark blue print, cotton cook's gown beneath the large white linen apron with the white kerchief at the throat, brought up the small mahogany tea tray with her own hands. She had not sent it up by the kitchen maid. She had carried it herself. She set it down upon the small round table between the wing chairs in the careful, gentle way of a woman who had cooked through 6 years of mornings for a young mistress she loved. She inclined. She withdrew. Mrs. Ainsley observed from the doorway in passing and withdrew likewise. Mrs. Penrose laid the Persuasion open upon the small round table beside the tray. She poured the tea into the 2 cups in the careful pattern of a hostess who had poured tea 5,000 mornings. She handed the Duke his cup. He took it. He inclined. The reading hour was concluded. Neither said so. Through the rest of November, the household readjusted in the slow, careful way of a country household learning the new pattern of its days. The Duke called every other day at 11, walked up from the Penrose Arms, was received by Mr. Roxburgh at the great door, was shown through to the South Library. Lizzie Wren came in at the quiet word and took the upright cane chair by the door with her sewing. Mrs. Penrose read aloud from Persuasion in her steady, soft, warm, low alto for the hour. The Duke listened in the steady, considering gravity, his clear, cool, storm-blue eyes upon the small fire. Mrs. Traherne brought up the tea tray with her own hands at the 12th stroke, Mrs. Ainsley observed from the doorway and withdrew. The reading hour was established. It was not spoken of. The Duke did not stay to dinner. At the half hour after 12, he set down his cup, rose, inclined, took his hat and gloves from Mr. Roxburgh in the hall, and walked back down the South Avenue under the cold light. He took his afternoon at the Penrose Arms with Mr. Pendlebury and the small black leather travelling deed box, working through the standing papers of the estate, asking no question that was not strictly proper. He took his dinner alone in the small parlour at 5. He went up to bed at 10. The pattern of the fortnight that followed was that pattern, kept exactly. On the Sunday morning of the 30th of November, after the morning service at St. Albans Parish Church in Penrose Village, the Reverend Stowell, 55, his soft, sandy grey hair finely thinning at the crown, his clear, honest hazel eyes behind the small gold-rimmed spectacles, his fair, gently weathered skin, and the long, kind, clean-shaven face showing the steady patience of 30 years, upon the same parish, medium 5'10", thin and a little stooped in the black cassock with the white linen surplice and the white collar band and the small silver crucifix on the black silk cord, walked up to Penrose Hall, his prayer book in his right hand, his hat in his left. He was received by Mr. Roxburgh and shown through to the small morning room. The Duke received him, with Mrs. Penrose at her place beside the small fire. The Reverend Stowell made his short, proper speech of thanks, for the parish call continued. He had heard from the families upon the village list that the waggons had gone down upon the Friday in the same careful pattern as in the late Sir Jonathan's time, and he begged leave, on behalf of the parish poor, to thank his Grace and Mrs. Penrose for the kindness of the continuance. The Duke inclined. Mrs. Penrose inclined. The Reverend Stowell observed the household, the Duke at the chair opposite the young widow, the maid by the door with her sewing, the steady quiet between them. And he said nothing of what he observed. He took the small glass of sherry that Mr. Roxburgh brought up, drank it, inclined, and went down again to the village. That evening, the Duke sat alone at the small writing desk in his room at the Penrose Arms. The fire burned low. The single candle stood at his right hand. He drew toward him the small green calf pocket commonplace book that had been his late father's, opened it at a fresh page, dipped his pen, and wrote a single line. She reads as Sir Jonathan wrote of her. I had not known. He set down the pen. He read the line through once. He closed the small green calf book. He blew out the candle. The Tuesday morning of the 9th of December dawned over Penrose Hall in a thin, pale blue light that lay along the east front like washed silk. A frost had taken the lawns in the night and had not yet wholly given way. The box hedges of the South Rose garden stood rimed in fine white, and the rooks went up out of the bare elms at the first stir of the household. The brass clock on the mantel of the South Library ticked steady and small in the long quiet of the house. Mrs. Georgiana Penrose, 22, slender and upright at 5 and 4, took her breakfast at 7:30 in the small breakfast parlour, see as she had done these 11 months past. Her long, rich, dark, russet wavy hair, deep, warm, russet brown with copper lights, was pinned in its low chignon at the nape under the white widow's cap of fine lawn. Her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes, warm autumn-leaf brown, shading to pale moss-green at the edges, rested upon her tea and toast in their composed quiet. Her ivory fair skin held its faint, warm rose flush across the cheekbones. The small natural beauty mark, just above the right corner of her upper lip, moved with the small movement of her mouth as she thanked the parlour-maid. She wore her plain, high-waisted, soft dove-grey and black wool morning gown with its high black velvet trim at the throat, her plain black indoor slippers, and at her neck the small gold mourning locket on its thin black silk ribbon. Her plain gold wedding band sat upon her left hand. At 11:15 she took up her copy of Persuasion and seated herself in the right-hand wing chair by the South Library hearth. The reading hour at 11 had become, in the 4 weeks since the 14th of November, the steady centre of the household's day. Lord Hugo Alexander Ainsworth, 4th Duke of Hertford, 34, was shown into the South Library by Mr. Roxburgh at 1 minute before the hour. His thick, dark, walnut-brown, wavy hair, deep, warm walnut brown with bronze lights, was cut close at the nape and brushed his coat collar. The one premature streak of pure silver above his right temple lay sharp against the warm walnut, and the one fallen lock crossed his brow as it always did. His clear, cool, storm-blue eyes, true cool slate blue, the colour of an English channel under cloud, held their steady, considering gaze. His fair, faintly weathered skin from country riding was clean-shaven, the small, thin, pale scar high above his left brow, the legacy of a 1810 fall on a slate roof at Hartfell when he had been fetching down a kitten, sat quiet beneath the fallen lock. His firm, grave mouth wore its small, composed quiet. The small dark mole at the right corner of his lower lip moved with the small inclination he made at the doorway. He was tall, at 6 and 2, lean, broad-shouldered, in his dark walnut-brown country morning coat over the black silk waistcoat, the black breeches, the brown-topped boots, the white cravat, the heavy silver Hartfell signet, 3 sheaves of wheat over a stone bridge, was upon his right hand, and the band of black crape lay upon his left arm. Lizzie Wren, 19, had taken her chair by the door with her sewing. Soft, mid-brown hair pinned in a neat low bun beneath the small white lace cap, clear hazel eyes upon her work, the small jet cross on its black silk cord at her throat, white linen apron and fichu over the plain dark grey print cotton lady's maid gown. Hugo seated himself in the chair opposite Mrs. Penrose. They had reached, on this Tuesday morning, the 11th chapter of Persuasion, Captain Wentworth at Lyme, and Mr. Elliot first seen on the steps of the inn. Mrs. Penrose read in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, her gloved hand quiet upon the page. Hugo listened. The fire ticked, the brass clock struck the quarter and then the half, and they read on. It was at noon, a little before the close of the chapter, that the hired post-chaise came up the long avenue. The carriage was of indifferent build, the panels ill-painted in a thin black lacquer that had cracked at the lower edges, the off-side door-handle bound with a turn of cord where its catch had given way. The 2 job horses had been hard driven through the cold. The postilion in his rough grey livery sat his near horse with the stiff fixed look of a man paid the half of his fare and trusted in no way for the other half. The chaise came up the avenue at a pace that hesitated and then asserted itself, as though the man within had at the last quarter-mile composed his face to be seen. Mr. Roxburgh, 60, thinning silver-grey hair brushed back, pale blue eyes finely lined, long kind face, clean-shaven, tall, 6-foot thin and upright in his plain black butler's tailcoat and white cravat and black silk waistcoat with small gilt buttons, with the small black silk mourning band on his left arm for the late Sir Jonathan, stood at the great door and observed the chaise. He marked the cracked lacquer, he marked the cord at the door-handle, he marked the gentleman within as he alighted. His face composed itself into the polite blankness that had served him 40 years. The gentleman who stepped down was of 41, of medium height at 5 and 9, with a soft paunch beneath the waistcoat that put a strain upon the lower button of his coat. His sandy grey thinning hair had been carefully oiled forward over a high pale forehead in a manner intended to suggest abundance and achieving only the suggestion of effort. His small, shallow, watery, pale blue eyes, set close beside a fine straight nose, settled into a look of practised appraisal. His sallow skin was broken at the cheek flats, with the fine red veins of a man who took his port standing. His weak, narrow chin slid quickly into a long upper lip, and the oily half-smile of practiced self-importance arranged itself upon his mouth. He wore a dark, bottle-green wool tailcoat with worn gilt buttons, a primrose-yellow silk waistcoat slightly stained at the lapel, buff pantaloons and top boots with brass tassels. A quizzing glass on a black silk ribbon hung at his breast. He carried a plain, dark grey beaver hat under his left arm and a small leather portfolio in his right. He carried no weapon of any kind. He came up the shallow stone steps in his own time and presented his card. "Mr. Tobias Carstairs," he said, "upon a matter of family business with the late Sir Jonathan Penrose's estate. I shall, I think, be expected." Mr. Roxburgh received the card upon the small silver salver that stood within the great hall, looked at it the proper instant, and inclined. "If you will be so good as to wait, sir." He showed the visitor into the morning room upon the south front, where a small fire had been kept up since 6. He drew off and closed the door, went the length of the flagged passage to the south library, and knocked softly. "Your Grace, Madame, a Mr. Tobias Carstairs is below upon a matter he describes as family business with the late Sir Jonathan Penrose's estate. He desires to be received." Mrs. Penrose's gloved hand came quiet to rest upon the page. Hugo looked once at her and once at Mr. Roxburgh. "Show him to the morning room, Roxburgh. I shall come down. Send to the small estate room and ask Mr. Pendlebury to attend me there." "He is in the morning room already, Your Grace." "Very good." Mrs. Penrose closed persuasion upon a slip of black silk ribbon and laid the book upon the small inlaid table at her elbow. Hugo inclined to her with the small grave courtesy that had become habitual. She inclined the half-inch of her own. He passed out with Mr. Roxburgh. Mr. Pendlebury, 49, came up out of the small estate room at the foot of the south passage as Hugo crossed the hall. His thinning silver-grey hair was carefully combed back. His steady grey eyes behind the small gold-rimmed spectacles held their habitual quiet. His fair indoor pallor and the long, narrow scholar's face, clean-shaven, gave him, at 6 foot, thin and slightly stooped, the look he had carried these 20 years. He wore plain black superfine, a white cravat, a black silk waistcoat, charcoal pantaloons, and polished black shoes. The leather-bound client's ledger was in his hand. "Your Grace, Pendlebury, a Mr. Tobias Carstairs. I do not know him. He claims a family connection. Bring whatever of the late Sir Jonathan's settled will is to hand." "It is in the deed box, Your Grace. I shall fetch it directly." They came together into the morning room at noon. Mr. Carstairs stood at the hearth, the portfolio in his hand, his small, watery, pale blue eyes moving across the silver and the chimney-piece with the appraising flicker of a man unable to keep the appraisal from his face. He turned at their entry. The oily half-smile composed itself. He made a bow that was almost the proper depth, and a fraction less. "Your Grace, I am most obliged for the audience. I am Mr. Tobias Carstairs of Bedford Square, late of Northampton. My business, I trust, shall be brief. Mr. Carstairs." Hugo did not seat himself. He did not invite Carstairs to sit. He stood at the long table with Mr. Pendlebury at his right elbow, the client's ledger between them and the settled will of the late Sir Jonathan Penrose lying flat under Mr. Pendlebury's quiet hand. "You will state your business, Mr. Carstairs." The visitor cleared his throat. "Your Grace, I am a distant Penrose connection. My late mother, Mrs. Maria Carstairs, née Penrose, was Sir Jonathan Penrose's third cousin. She died in May of this present year, and upon her deathbed she did me the kindness of pressing upon me the right of certain small personal effects of her cousin Sir Jonathan, which she had been given to understand were to come to her family by family right at his decease. What effects, Mr. Carstairs? For, your Grace, Sir Jonathan's silver hunting flask, his Latin Tacitus, the 1681 Cambridge edition, his late father's mourning ring, that is to say, my own late father's mourning ring, which had been understood between the families to come down to the Carstairs branch, and a small, silver-set miniature of his late mother. Sentimental matters, your Grace, of no great pecuniary worth, of much concern to the family memory. He laid the portfolio upon the table and undid its string. From within, he drew a single sheet, folded in 3, somewhat creased. I have here, your Grace, a copy of a letter from Sir Jonathan to my late mother, written in 1799, in which the matter is plainly set forth. The original, alas, has not survived my mother's papers. This copy was made by her own hand in her later years. He laid the sheet upon the table. The oily half-smile was at full play. Mr. Pendlebury took the sheet up between 2 fingers and held it to the cold December light from the long window the proper time, then laid it down beside the will. He opened the client's ledger and turned 3 leaves. He made a small dry sound at the back of his throat that was not quite a cough. Your Grace, with your permission, proceed, Mr. Pendlebury. As to the late Sir Jonathan Penrose's settled will, executed at this house upon the 14th of June, 1811, and proved at Doctors' Commons upon the 20th of December, last, there is no entry, no clause, no schedule, and no codicil bearing upon any one of the 4 articles Mr. Carstairs has named. The personal effects pass under the residuary clause to the late Sir Jonathan's widow, in their entirety. I drew the will myself, with Sir Jonathan at this very table. As to the silver hunting flask, the inventory taken at Sir Jonathan's decease shows it engraved with Sir Jonathan's initials only, J.P., upon the obverse, and bearing no second engraving upon any face. As to the Latin Tacitus, the 1681 Cambridge edition, the book bears upon its fly-leaf Sir Jonathan's own undergraduate inscription in his own clear hand, Jonathan Penrose, Trinity College, Michaelmas, 1771. It has stood upon the South Library shelf 46 years. As to the mourning ring, the band is engraved upon the inside, J.P. Obit August, 1788, and was taken from the hand of Sir Jonathan's father upon his deathbed at Penrose Hall in August of 1788. It has no connection with the Carstairs branch. The Carstairs gentleman of whom Mr. Carstairs speaks as his own late father is a distinct person, deceased at Northampton in 1804, and bore neither the same name nor the same arms. As to the miniature, the inventory shows it to be of the late Lady Penrose Senior, painted at Bath in 1762. The lady stood in no relation with the Carstairs branch. As to the letter Mr. Carstairs has produced, it is undated. The hand corresponds in no particular with Sir Jonathan's hand of the period, of which I have here in this ledger 4 authenticated examples. The ductus differs, the formation of the capital P differs, the paper is not the paper Sir Jonathan was using in 1799, and there is no copy of any such letter in Sir Jonathan's outgoing correspondence book of 1799, which I have at Hartfell Park, and which has been complete and unbroken these 18 years. The claim, Your Grace, has, in my professional opinion, no foundation in law, in document, or in fact. He closed the leather-bound client's ledger upon his testimony with a small composed sound, and stood the proper half-step back from the table. Mr. Carstairs's small, watery, pale-blue eyes had moved twice in the course of the recital. The oily half-smile had stiffened upon his long upper lip into an arrangement of muscle held in place by the will. He drew one quick breath. Hugo turned to him. Hugo. He stood at the long table, the silver streak above his right temple sharp in the cold December light, the storm-blue eyes upon Mr. Carstairs in steady, cold composure. He spoke once, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, without raising his voice, and without any change of countenance. Mr. Carstairs, the claim has no foundation. The personal effects of my late cousin, Sir Jonathan Penrose, belong to his widow Mrs. Penrose by every proper construction of his settled will, and shall remain in her keeping. Good morning. Mr. Carstairs stood a moment in the silence the words made. The colour came up the cheek flats in two small dull patches. The broken veins darkened. He set down the leather portfolio upon the long table with a sound a fraction louder than was quite proper. Your Grace, I must protest. I must protest most warmly. The matter has been understood within the family these many years. It is not for a solicitor to dismiss in 5 minutes of paper shuffling a claim I have come 30 miles in a December frost to prefer. I shall write this very afternoon to my own solicitor in Furnival's Inn. I shall, if his Grace shall be obstinate, take the matter into Chancery. I shall. He raised his right hand to the quizzing glass at his breast, with the air of a man producing his last and most cutting argument. The glass slipped from his fingers and fell the short distance to the end of the ribbon and swung there. He left it swinging. I shall write, Your Grace. I shall write today. Hugo rang the bell at the corner of the chimney-piece. Mr. Roxburgh appeared at the door of the morning room. His long, kind face was at its polite blankness. He made the small, open gesture of a butler showing a guest out. The half-step aside, the quiet sweep of the right hand toward the great hall and the front door beyond. Mr. Carstairs is leaving us, Roxburgh. Very good, Your Grace. This way, Mr. Carstairs, if you please. Mr. Carstairs took up his hat and his portfolio. He left the quizzing glass, swinging at the end of its silk ribbon. He did not gather it. He went the length of the flagged passage and out at the great door without further speech. The hired chaise stood at the gravel sweep, with the postillion still upon his near horse. Mr. Carstairs got up. The postillion put the horses to the wheel. The chaise turned with a small lurch of its ill-painted off-side and went down the long avenue toward the Northampton Road. Mr. Roxburgh closed the great door upon it. That evening at 8:30, the candles being lit upon the chimney-piece, Hugo sat opposite Mrs. Penrose in the south library, and Lizzie Wren took her sewing to the chair by the door. The fire was at its quiet, steady red. Persuasion lay closed upon the inlaid table at Mrs. Penrose's elbow, with the slip of black silk ribbon between its leaves. He told her of the call. He told her plainly, with no embellishment, the 4 articles Carstairs had asked for, the letter Carstairs had produced, the dismantling of it by Mr. Pendlebury, point upon point, the threat of Chancery. The chaise gone down the avenue. Mrs. Penrose listened in her composed quiet, with her gloved hand upon her lap. Her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes held steady upon the fire. The small, natural beauty mark, just above the right corner of her upper lip, moved with the small breath she drew when he came to the 4 articles by name. She did not interrupt. When he had finished, she sat a moment in her small, composed silence. Then she lifted her eyes to his and spoke in her steady, soft, warm, low alto. Your Grace. The Tacitus was the book my late husband gave me on the morning of our wedding day in October of 1811. The flask was a present from his old college friends in 1773. The ring was his father's, taken from his father's hand on his father's deathbed in 1788. The miniature is his mother. I shall keep them, Your Grace, for so long as I am at Penrose Hall. Hugo inclined his head. The fire ticked. He answered her in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, the storm-blue eyes upon her in their steady, considering gaze. Mrs. Penrose, they are yours, regardless of where you are. I shall send Pendlebury this very evening to draw the proper deed transferring all of Sir Jonathan's personal effects out of the entail and into your absolute property. He rose, spoke to Mr. Roxburgh in the passage, and returned to his chair. They sat in the small, composed quiet of the room while the candles burned and the fire ticked, and Lizzie sewed by the door, and they did not read further from Persuasion that evening, the ribbon being kept at its place. Mr. Pendlebury came up to the South Library at 9:30 that night, with a clean sheet of laid paper, his inkpot, 2 clean pens, and the proper printed form of a deed of personal property settlement. He laid them upon the long polished walnut writing table beneath the long window, and opened the leather-bound client's ledger to the proper place. He drafted the deed standing at the writing table, with the small gold-rimmed spectacles low upon his nose, in the steady quiet of the room. It transferred out of the entail of Penrose Hall and into the absolute property of Mrs. Georgiana Penrose, née Broderick, the whole of the personal effects of the late Sir Jonathan Penrose, Baronet, of every description, plate and books and rings and miniatures, to be hers absolutely without reservation. It was drawn in 23 lines of fine, clear scholar's hand. Mr. Pendlebury read it through aloud once. Hugo nodded. Hugo signed. Hartfell in his deep, clear hand, the heavy Hartfell signet pressed afterward into a small dab of red wax. Mr. Pendlebury countersigned as solicitor and as the first witness, and put down the date, December 9th, 1817. Mr. Roxburgh, summoned up by the small bell at the corner of the chimney-piece, signed as the second witness in the steady, upright clerk's hand he had been taught at Penrose Sunday School 60 years before. Mr. Pendlebury folded the deed and laid it in the right-hand drawer of the writing table, turned the small brass key in the lock, and laid the key upon the table. He inclined to his Grace and to Madame. He withdrew. At 10 o'clock, Mr. Roxburgh came and turned down the candles, leaving only the small chamber-stick lit upon the inlaid table at Mrs. Penrose's elbow. Hugo rose. He bowed to her with a small inclination an inch deeper than the proper, and bade her good night in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. He passed out and down the long flagged passage to the great door. Mr. Roxburgh followed with his hat and his greatcoat. The great door closed behind him upon the cold December night. Mrs. Penrose sat a moment longer in the right-hand wing-chair, the deed folded in her lap. The fire ticked at its low red. Lizzie Wren waited at the door, with her sewing folded in her hand. Mrs. Penrose lifted her gloved hand once, slowly, and laid it upon the closed deed, the plain gold wedding band of her left hand resting upon the laid paper. She held it there the small, steady time. The brass clock struck the 10:15. She rose composedly, took up the chamber-stick and the deed, and went up the south stair to her own apartments. Lizzie Wren, a quiet, half-step behind her, and the south library was left to its banked fire and its dark. The Saturday morning of December the 13th, 1817, dawned cold and pale blue over Penrose Hall, with a fine hard frost upon the gravel of the south rose garden, and a thin white rime upon the south wall, and a hush within the great house that was the hush of careful preparation. Mrs. Ainsley, 55, and upright at her medium 5 feet 5 inches, her soft mid-brown hair shot with grey pinned smooth beneath the small white linen housekeeper's cap, her clear hazel kind eyes steady, her plain dark bombazine housekeeper's gown brushed, and her white linen apron freshly tied, and the chatelaine of household keys at her waist, softly chiming as she walked, had been since 6 o'clock, about the airing of the South Rose suite, which had been Sir Jonathan's late mother's own suite a generation since. 2 housemaids had been at the suite from the first stroke of 6. The windows opened a 1/4 of an inch behind the heavy curtains. The great bed turned down with its lavender-scented linen, the small grate laid with apple wood and lit by 7:30, so that the rooms should be properly warmed by noon. She had set in the dressing-room a small jug of winter jasmine and rosemary, and on the writing-table a small silver tray of clean steel pens and a fresh pot of black ink. Below stairs Mrs. Traherne, 50 and plump at her medium 5 feet 5, her soft grey-brown hair pinned beneath the large white linen cap, her warm, pale blue eyes pink with the heat of the great range, her fair, pink-cheeked round face, her plain dark blue print cotton cook's gown half hidden beneath the great white linen apron and the white kerchief tied at her throat, had been at her stove since 6 o'clock too, with Mrs. Ainsley's quiet conferring upon the menu at 7:30. They had agreed upon a clear soup, a turbot, a roast saddle of mutton with red currant jelly, a dish of partridges, and an apple compote with clotted cream, upon the seed cake for the tea, and the proper dark fruit cake at 5 with the second pot. Mrs. Penrose, 22 and slender at her upright 5'4", her long, rich, dark russet wavy hair smoothed in its low chignon at the nape, with the small wisps escaped at the temples, her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes warm with the small, private gladness of a coming guest, her ivory fair skin holding its faint, warm rose flush, the small natural beauty mark above the right corner of her upper lip, steady at composed quiet, in her plain dove grey and black wool morning gown with the high black velvet trim and the small gold mourning locket at her neck, walked once round the South Rose garden with Lizzie Wren 3 paces behind, and stopped at the iron bench where the bare canes of the Bourbon roses had been tied close against the frost, and stood a small, composed minute, looking up the long avenue of bare beeches by which a Brockwell carriage might be expected. She turned and walked back to the great door, thanked Mrs. Ainsley for the South Rose sweet, and Mrs. Traherne for the seed cake, and went into the South Library to her morning hour. The Brockwell carriage came up the long avenue at 4:30 on the cold blue Saturday afternoon. The light was already failing toward the early winter dusk. The tall bare beeches stood black against the pale duck egg of the western sky. The carriage was a plain dark green travelling chariot with the Brockwell arms upon the panel, 3 oak leaves on a chevron, the ancient blazon of the Warwickshire Brockwells, drawn by 4 good bay post horses with their breath steaming in the cold. The coachman drew up at the great door. The 2 grooms sprang down. Mr. Roxburgh, 60 and tall at his upright 6 feet, his thinning silver-grey hair brushed back, his pale blue eyes finely lined, his fair pale indoor skin composed at his long, kind, clean-shaven face, in his plain black butler's tailcoat, and the white cravat properly tied, and the black silk waistcoat with small gilt buttons, and the charcoal pantaloons and the polished black shoes, the small black silk mourning band on his left arm for the late Sir Jonathan in its 12th month, came down the 3 shallow stone steps at the precise moment the carriage stopped, and the door was let down, and the lady was handed down by her husband. Lady Sophie Brockwell was 36 and slender at her upright 5'7". Her dark walnut-brown wavy hair was pinned in a smooth low chignon under a small white lace morning cap. Her clear, cool, storm-blue eyes, the very mirror of her brother's, were bright with the long, cold drive. Her fair, faintly freckled skin was a little brightened by the cold. Her oval face, with its soft, well-shaped mouth, held that habitual, easy warmth which was the chief beauty of her countenance. She wore, this Saturday, 6 weeks plus 3 days from the funeral of her mother, the late Lady Caroline Ainsworth, and therefore still in deep, full mourning by the strict old reckoning, a plain, high-waisted, soft black silk full morning gown, a white lace fichu folded at her throat, a small black jet brooch at the fichu's join, a plain gold wedding band on her left hand, and small pearl drop earrings. Sir Aubrey Brockwell came down behind her. He was 40 and lean at his tall 6 feet, his soft sandy brown hair just brushing his collar, his clear, honest hazel eyes set in his fair, lightly tanned country skin, his clean-shaven, kind, open face, steady at the warm civility of a rival. He wore a plain dark green country coat with a black crepe mourning band on the left arm for his mother-in-law, a buff waistcoat, buff breeches, brown-topped boots, and a white cravat properly tied. Mr. Roxburgh inclined gravely. "Sir Aubrey, Lady Sophie, welcome to Penrose Hall." He gave the smallest signal to the underfootmen. The boxes were taken down. The horses led round to the stable court. He handed Lady Sophie up the 3 shallow stone steps with the practised civility of 40 years of butlering, and Sir Aubrey followed his wife. The great door closed behind them. Within the hall, Mrs. Ainsley took the cloaks. Mr. Roxburgh ushered the visitors toward the great drawing-room, where their host and hostess were already standing. Lord Hugo Alexander Ainsworth, 4th Duke of Hertford, 34 and tall, at his lean, broad-shouldered 6 feet 2, his thick, dark walnut-brown wavy hair just brushing his coat collar with the one premature streak of pure silver above the right temple, his clear, cool, storm-blue eyes steady upon his sister at the door, the small, thin, pale scar high above the left brow faint in the candlelight, the small, dark mole at the right corner of the firm, grave mouth, steady in a plain, dark, walnut-brown country morning coat over a black silk waistcoat with small silver buttons, black breeches, brown-topped boots, white cravat, the heavy silver Hartfell signet upon his right hand, and a band of black crape on the left arm. Lord Hugo stepped forward as his sister entered the great drawing-room and took her hand, and bent and kissed her cheek. He turned. He led her, with a steady civility that had in it a brother's quiet pride, the 6 paces to where Mrs. Penrose stood beside the fire. "Sophie," said he, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, "may I present Mrs. Penrose to you? Mrs. Penrose, my elder sister, Lady Sophie Brockwell." And then to Sophie with the smallest formal incline, "Mrs. Georgiana Penrose, of Penrose Hall." Lady Sophie inclined to Mrs. Penrose with a depth that was a little more than the ordinary morning call civility. Her clear, cool, storm-blue eyes went over the young widow once with a sister's careful warmth, and rested upon Georgiana's soft hazel-green eyes, and the easy warmth at her soft, well-shaped mouth deepened into a smile. "Mrs. Penrose, I have wished a great while to make your acquaintance." She had had her brother's last 3 letters from Penrose, with the small private pleasure of a sister, and the names within those letters had told her more than perhaps her brother knew. And she saw Georgiana now, the slender upright figure in the dove-grey and black, with the small gold mourning locket at the throat, and the pleasure of the letters became, in the moment of meeting, a quiet warmth. Georgiana inclined in her steady, soft, warm, low alto. "Lady Sophie, you are very welcome at Penrose Hall." Sir Aubrey was presented in his turn. He bowed with his open country civility. She received him with the steady quiet of a hostess of 6 years' standing. The 4 of them took their places, Mrs. Penrose in her usual right-hand chair by the fire, Lady Sophie upon the small sofa to her right, Sir Aubrey opposite his wife in the broad-winged chair, the Duke standing at the chimney-piece, his right hand at the mantel. Tea was brought up at 5 sharp. Mrs. Treherne's seed-cake was set upon the small mahogany tea-table with the dark fruit-cake and the almond biscuits. Mr. Roxburgh poured the first cups and withdrew to the sideboard. The thin steam of the silver teapot rose into the candlelight. The conversation came on quietly. It came first upon their late husband's 2 old friendships, how the 3rd Duke of Hertford had been at Trinity College, Cambridge, in the years 1772 to 1776, how Sir Jonathan Penrose had been at the same college in the same years, how the 2 young men had read mathematics together in the long Trinity afternoons and had remained friends through the whole of the 3rd Duke's life. Sophie spoke of her father's particular regard for Sir Jonathan. Georgiana spoke of her late husband's mention, more than once at the Penrose evening fire, of old Hertford at Trinity. and Hugo, who had heard the name from his own father in his boyhood without having understood the depth of the connection, listened. The talk turned to the parish call at Penrose. Georgiana told, in her quiet, low alto, of the small standing list Sir Jonathan had kept of the 8 cottages of the village, to which a load of coal was sent at the 1st of November and the 1st of February in each year, and of how the new Duke had given her at her own first asking a free hand to continue the list, and of how the November loads had gone out in the proper week. Sir Aubrey, who kept a not unsimilar list at Brockwell Hall, nodded with the kind country approval of a man who knew the worth of such a list. The talk turned to the small parish school. Georgiana told it plainly, but Lady Sophie drew the particulars from her with a sister's gentle insistence that in the spring of the present year she had taken the small upper room of the village schoolhouse at Penrose, a room scarce 20 feet by 16, but with a good fire and 4 long deal benches, and engaged the 2 daughters of the cook, the Mrs. Traherne, to teach the parish children 3 afternoons a week in reading and a little plain arithmetic and the catechism. That the Mrs. Traherne came of a Sunday morning to the South Library to take their orders for the week from Mrs. Penrose, and that the school had grown, over the 11 months of her widowhood, from 9 children to 16, and was the quiet enterprise of her widow's year. Lady Sophie heard her with a steady warmth. "Mrs. Penrose, it is very well done." The talk turned at last to the wedding of the late Lady Caroline Ainsworth and the 3rd Duke of Hertford in the year 1781. Lady Sophie told it as a daughter tells a mother's tale, how Lady Caroline, then Miss Caroline Devereux of Devereux Park in Norfolk, had been married to the 3rd Duke at St. George's, Hanover Square, on the cold blue morning of February the 20th, 1781, by the old Bishop of Norwich. How the Reverend Mr. Broderick, Georgiana's late father, had been one of the small party of Cambridge friends present. How the new Duchess had come down to Hartfell Park in March, and how Sophie herself had been born in October of 1786, 5 years after the wedding. Hugo had come 12 years after his sister, the 3 Ainsworth children spaced across the long good marriage of their parents. Georgiana, who had not known her own mother, who had died at her birth, listened with a hostess's steady attention and a young woman's small private interest in the mother of the man at her chimney-piece. Tea was carried away at 6. The visitors were shown by Mrs. Ainsley up the great stair to the South Rose Suite to dress. At 7 o'clock they came down to dinner in the small dining room, for the great dining hall was closed against the December cold, and the small dining room at the south end of the house, panelled in oak and warmed by its own good hearth, and lit by a dozen candles in the 2 silver branches upon the long sideboard, was the proper room for a family dinner of 4. Hugo took the head. Lady Sophie sat at his right, Sir Aubrey at his left, Georgiana at the foot, the proper hostess of her own table. Mrs. Traherne sent up the dinner in its proper order. The clear soup came first. The turbot followed in its plain butter sauce. The roast saddle of mutton was brought up at the second course with the red currant jelly. The dish of partridges came with the saddle of mutton. The apple compote and the small dish of clotted cream finished the table. The wine, a good claret of Sir Jonathan's own laying down of 1798, was served by Mr. Roxburgh with the steady gravity of his 40 years. The conversation through the dinner was steady and warm. It went among the 4 of them as good talk goes among family. The state of the Northamptonshire roads, which had held, the late frost, the parish of Brockwell, Sir Aubrey's 3 children, whom Lady Sophie spoke of with a mother's contained warmth, the late Reverend Mr. Broderick, of whom Sir Aubrey had heard much from his late father-in-law. At the second remove, after the partridges had been carried away, Sir Aubrey, in his open country way, told an old Cambridge story he had had once from the third Duke himself. How in the spring of 1775, young Mr. Ainsworth and young Mr. Penrose had been lodging together in Trinity, and had, upon a particular evening of May, come up against the proctor in Trinity Street after the closing of the great gate, and had between them talked the proctor into a half-hour's amused leniency upon the strength of a Latin tag from Tacitus. The very Tacitus, Sir Aubrey added with a smile in Georgiana's direction, that had stood at Penrose Hall ever since. The story was told well, and at the close of it, Hugo's firm, grave mouth lifted a quarter of an inch at the right corner where the small dark mole sat, the smallest soft easing of a strong jaw. Lady Sophie, looking down the candles to the foot of the table, observed the lift, and observed too that her hostess had observed it, and said nothing, and lifted her own wine-glass in her plain gold-banded hand with a small private warmth, and drank. The cloth was drawn at 8:30. The ladies withdrew to the great drawing-room. The gentlemen sat a half-hour over their port, and joined the ladies before the tea-tray at 9:30. Lady Sophie kissed her hostess upon the cheek at the foot of the great stair at 10:30, and went up to the South Rose suite with Sir Aubrey, and was shown to her door by Mrs. Ainsley with a candle. The Sunday morning of December the 14th dawned cold and pale blue, and very still. At 10:30, the household and the Brockwells walked the quarter-mile down the South Avenue to the parish church of St. Alban in Penrose village. The Reverend Stowell, 55 and medium at his thin 5'10", his soft sandy grey hair finely thinning at the crown, his clear, honest hazel eyes behind the small gold-rimmed spectacles, his fair, gently weathered skin set in his long, kind, clean-shaven face, in his black cassock with the white linen surplice and the white collar band and the small silver crucifix on the black silk cord, preached steadily upon the proper Advent text of patience, that the patient man was the man who could keep the long-appointed time without quickening his foot. Georgiana sat in the family pew between Lady Sophie and Mr. Roxburgh. Hugo sat at the aisle end. The four of them stood for the hymn, and knelt for the prayer, and walked out at the close into the cold blue churchyard. After the service, the Brockwells took a walk on the gravel of the South Rose garden with Hugo, while Georgiana, with Lizzie Wren 3 paces behind, walked the half-mile to the cottage of Mrs. Ainsley's elderly mother, old Mrs. Birch, 83, in her small thatched cottage at the foot of the village green, and read her a chapter of her chosen Psalter, and left her with a small jar of Mrs. Treherne's plum preserve. Lady Sophie drew her brother aside at the end of the south wall by the iron bench, where the bare canes of the Bourbon roses were tied close. A robin ticked in the holly at the wall's end. Lady Sophie drew her plain, heavy black wool cloak close, turned her clear, cool, storm-blue eyes upon her brother's matching pair, and spoke quietly. "Hugo, Mamma would have liked her. I have liked her. Aubrey has liked her. Ask her, Hugo. There is no reason on earth to wait into the spring." Hugo stood a small, composed moment. The lock of dark walnut hair fell across his brow. He did not put it back. The pale streak above the right temple caught the cold blue light. He spoke at last, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, with a steady gravity that allowed no quickening. "Sophie, I shall ask her. It will not be this side of November." Lady Sophie looked up at him. "Why?" "Because she is in mourning for Sir Jonathan until the 3rd of November next, and I shall not put her into a position in which she must answer me a day before her own 12 months are out. I shall ask her on the morning of November the 4th, in the year of our Lord, 1818. 11 months and a day from this present talk. I shall not press it sooner." He said it without the smallest tremor of doubt. Lady Sophie held his gaze a long, quiet second, and then she rose upon her toes and kissed her brother once upon the cheek, high, near the temple where the silver streak ran, and said nothing more. They turned and walked back along the south wall to the great door together. Sunday's evening dinner was civil and quiet. The four of them sat again in the small dining room at 7, and the talk went steadily upon the Sunday topics of country families. Lady Sophie observed her hostess once across the candles with a sister's careful warmth, and said nothing of the South Rose Garden conversation, and only when the cloth was drawn and the ladies were rising to withdraw did she lay her plain gold-banded hand for the smallest moment upon Georgiana's wrist and say, in her warm, clear voice, "Mrs. Penrose, Aubrey and I shall hope to see you at Brockwell Hall in the spring." Georgiana, in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, with the small candlelight in her hazel-green eyes, inclined her head. "Lady Sophie, I shall be very glad of it." The Monday morning of December the 15th came on cold and pale blue. At 10 o'clock, the Brockwell carriage was brought round to the great door. The boxes were strapped behind. The 4 bay post-horses stood blowing in the cold. Mr. Roxburgh handed Lady Sophie up the carriage step. With the steady civility of 40 years, Lady Sophie paused with her small foot upon the step and turned and kissed Georgiana once upon each cheek in the cold blue Monday light, and said nothing of what she had decided, and stepped up into the carriage. Sir Aubrey followed his wife. The door was closed. The coachman touched his hat to the Duke. The carriage drove away down the long avenue of bare beeches at a slow, steady walk, and was gone. That afternoon at 3, Hugo and Georgiana took the gravel walk in the South Rose Garden. Lizzie Wren walked 3 paces behind with her sewing bag upon her wrist. The cold blue Northamptonshire December afternoon lay still upon them. They spoke of nothing but the parish coal, which had gone out in its second week to the 8 cottages, Mrs. Ainsley's elderly mother, who had been glad of the Sunday call and the plum preserve, the small parish school which would close on the Thursday for its Christmas fortnight and reopen on the second Monday of January. They walked the length of the south wall and back. A late robin ticked once in the holly. Hugo did not speak of his sister's words at the iron bench, nor of his own answer. He carried both within him in steady gravity. He had set himself 11 months and a day. He meant to keep them. He meant to spend them well. The cold of late January fell upon Northamptonshire in a thin grey sleet that clung at the leaded windows of Penrose Hall and turned the long lime tree avenue beyond the South Drive to a corridor of bare black branches faintly glazed in ice. In the South Library, at the long polished walnut writing table, the late afternoon post lay opened. Among the letters there was one addressed to Mr. Roxburgh in the steady fine slope of his old friend in town, a former under-butler now in service to a quiet Mayfair gentleman of some private intelligence, and Mr. Roxburgh, the silver-grey-haired butler of 60 years, with his pale blue eyes finely lined and his thin, upright 6-foot frame, in his plain black tailcoat and white cravat, had read his friend's note before he carried up to his mistress only the substance of it, and that quietly. It was that the gentleman known to the household as Mr. Tobias Carstairs, the sandy-grey, thinning 41-year-old of the bottle-green tailcoat and the primrose yellow waistcoat slightly stained at the lapel, who had called at the hall at noon on the 9th of December last and, been seen out, had taken to telling the story at Brooks's. The story was put about over hot suppers at the round table after midnight, that the new Duke of Hertford had taken the young Penrose widow into a peculiar private keeping at the Hall, that the country had been imposed upon, and that certain personal effects of the late baronet had been alienated from a proper Penrose heir by a deed of his Grace's solicitor unproperly drawn. Mr. Roxburgh did not carry that part of it to his mistress. He went, that same hour, by the side door of the south colonnade, across the gravel of the South Rose Garden in his good plain black tailcoat under a borrowed greatcoat, and laid the paper before his Grace at the Penrose Arms in the village. Lord Hugo Alexander Ainsworth, 4th Duke of Hertford, 34, tall, lean, broad-shouldered at 6'2", his thick, dark walnut-brown wavy hair, with its one premature streak of pure silver above the right temple cut close at the nape, and one lock fallen across the brow, his clear, cool, storm-blue eyes the colour of an English channel under cloud, set the paper down upon the small deal table of the inn parlour. He read it twice. He folded it. The clear, cool storm blue did not change. He thanked Mr. Roxburgh in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, and said only, "I shall write to my sister this evening." And he did so write to her, and that letter took the post-chaise up to town the following morning at 6. Lady Sophie Brockwell, née Ainsworth, 36, the elder sister of his Grace, married since the year 5 to Sir Aubrey Brockwell of Brockwell Hall in Warwickshire, was in town for the season at her father-in-law's house in Bruton Street. She was tall, slender, 5'7" upright, in her plain high-waisted, soft, black silk half-mourning gown, still kept for her late mother, the white lace fichu at her throat, fastened by the small black jet brooch, her dark walnut-brown wavy hair pinned in the smooth low chignon under the small white lace cap, her clear, cool, storm-blue eyes the mirror of her brother's, the small pearl drops at her ears. Her brother's letter she opened at the breakfast table at 9:30 and read through twice, and at 10:30 she sent her Abigail for her bonnet. She had heard the rumour herself, that very week, at Almack's, from the Countess of Sefton, Lady Sefton being indeed the original quiet party who had ridden from London in the September of the previous year to the late Dowager Duchess of Hertford, and therefore the readiest first witness any sister could have desired. Lady Sophie had heard her out, at the end of an indifferent quadrille, with a steady inclination of her dark walnut-brown head, and had said only that she would be calling on Lady Sefton in the morning. Lady Sefton, who had for very many years adored Lady Caroline Ainsworth, took Lady Sophie's hand and pressed it. The fortnight that followed was a fortnight of careful drawing-room calls. Lady Sophie called upon Lady Jersey in Berkeley Square, upon the Duchess of Devonshire in Piccadilly, upon the Countess of Spencer in St. James's Place, upon the Marchioness of Salisbury in Arlington Street, and at each fire she set the matter publicly straight in the steady tone of a sister who had no occasion to conceal a single particular. Her late mother, the Dowager Duchess of Hertford, who had lain in the family vault at Hertford since the cold 9th of October 1817, had written, in her own clear, strong hand on cream-laid paper, in the early September of that very year, a letter to her son, the present Duke desiring him most earnestly that the young widow at Penrose Hall be taken into the family rather than turned out of her late husband's house, that the Brockwells, who had themselves called at Penrose Hall in the December last, approved Mrs. Penrose unreservedly and most warmly, that Mrs. Penrose was a young woman of 22, of the most composed, quiet country breeding, brought up at her father's rectory in Northamptonshire, married at 16 at her father's deathbed, wished to her father's old Cambridge friend, the late Sir Jonathan Penrose, and held in the household at Penrose Hall by every servant in it, in the regard one keeps for a daughter. That the personal effects of the late baronet had been put into Mrs. Penrose's absolute property by a deed perfectly drawn at Penrose on the night of the 9th of December by the family solicitor Mr. Pendlebury, every one of those effects, the silver hunting flask of his college friends of 73, the Latin Tacitus of her late husband's Cambridge undergraduate days that had been the morning gift of their wedding day in 1811, her late husband's father's mourning ring, taken from his father's hand at the deathbed of 88, the silver-set miniature of her late husband's mother, being held by the proper construction of his settled will and by her late husband's expressed regard. Lady Jersey said, "Of course, "My dear," the Duchess of Devonshire said, "I shall not have it spoken of in this house." The Countess of Spencer said, "Carstairs, Carstairs, that wretched little man with the watery eyes. I believe he is 300 guineas in arrears with his wine merchant in Pall Mall." The Marchioness of Salisbury, who could end a season's reputation with a quarter-inch raise of her left brow, raised her left brow a quarter-inch and said nothing whatever. By the second Wednesday of February, Mr. Tobias Carstairs, calling at his usual hour at the door of Brooks's in St. James's Street, with his quizzing glass on its black silk ribbon and his oily half-smile, was informed by the porter, in the gravest civility, that His Grace the Duke of Hertford had been heard to remark that he no longer found the gentleman's company at the Round Table congenial, whereupon the porter closed the door, and Mr. Carstairs' name was struck off the supper-book, and Mr. Carstairs went away into the thin sleet of St. James's, and was not at Brooks's again that season nor any other. Mr. Pendlebury, the family solicitor of 49, his thinning silver-grey hair carefully combed back, the steady grey eyes behind the small gold-rimmed spectacles, the long narrow scholar's face clean-shaven, the tall 6-foot frame with its slight stoop in his plain black superfine, and his white cravat, and his black silk waistcoat, and his charcoal pantaloons, and his polished black shoes, had done his own quiet part of the work in Furnival's Inn that same fortnight. He had written, on the firm's headed paper in his fine clerk's hand, a stiff letter to Mr. Carstairs' solicitor, a Mr. Eames of Furnival's Inn, whose practice, it was understood about the inn, was in considerable embarrassment, warning him that any further public mention by Mr. Carstairs of the Penrose matter, or of the deed of December the 9th, or of the household at Penrose Hall, or of the relations of any party concerned in either, should meet with action both at common law and in equity, and that His Grace's instructions to that effect were unconditional. The letter, sealed with the heartfelt signet of the 3 sheaves of wheat over the stone bridge, went by the morning post of the 11th of February, was acknowledged in Mr. Eames's hand on the afternoon of the 12th, and received by Mr. Pendlebury at the Hartfeld Town House in Hanover Square on the morning of the 13th. By Mr. Pendlebury's quiet inquiry, that same week, of a clerk of his acquaintance at Furnival's Inn, an old quiet man with a snuff-box and a habit of drinking weak tea at the corner house of Lincoln's Inn Fields. Mr. Eames's account with Mr. Carstairs stood 300 guineas in arrears, and had stood so for above a 12-month. No bill in Chancery would be filed, no further public mention would be made. The matter, by every quiet and proper means, was closed. Easter Sunday fell that year upon the 22nd of March. The sleet had gone by the second week of the month, and the South Rose Garden at Penrose Hall lay under a faint, pale green softness of the first hawthorn in the hedge by the mid-morning of the holy day. Mrs. Georgiana Penrose, 22, walked the gravel of the South Drive at 9:30 in the morning under a pale Northamptonshire sun, with Lizzie Wren, the 19-year-old lady's maid, soft mid-brown hair pinned in a neat low bun beneath the small white lace cap, clear hazel eyes, fair lightly freckled skin, oval face with the kind quiet mouth, slender 5'2" upright in her plain dark grey print cotton lady's maid gown beneath the white linen apron and fichu at her shoulder. Mrs. Penrose wore that morning her plain high-waisted soft pearl-grey wool morning gown and her plain ivory silk slippers. She had no white widow's cap upon her long, rich, dark russet wavy hair pinned smooth in its low chignon at the nape, with the small wisps escaped at the temples. Her late husband's plain gold wedding band had been transferred at the breakfast table from her left hand to her right. Her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes were steady. She walked into the south porch of St Albans Parish Church in the village at 5 minutes before 10 o'clock. The Reverend Stowell, the parish vicar of 55, his soft sandy grey hair finely thinning at the crown, his clear, honest hazel eyes behind the small gold-rimmed spectacles, his fair, gently weathered skin, his long, kind face clean-shaven, his medium 5'10" thin slight stoop in the black cassock and the white linen surplice with the white collar band and the small silver crucifix on its black silk cord, observed her come in at the south porch from his place at the chancel as he spread his Easter linen upon the altar. He did not turn his head. He saw her by the long grey-white slant of the morning light. He said the office in his quiet Northamptonshire voice. He preached 8 minutes on the great morning text of the third day. And at the close of the service, as Mrs. Penrose passed him in the south porch with her gloved hand laid lightly upon Lizzie's arm, he gave her his quiet half-smile and said, "Mrs. Penrose, a happy Easter to you." She inclined her head a 1/4 inch. He inclined his. The rhythm of the year settled then about the household, and was the central rhythm of it. The reading hour at 11 became the central rhythm of the household. His Grace the Duke of Hartfell was at Penrose Hall every other week through the late spring and summer of 1818 and into the autumn. He kept Hartfell Park in Derbyshire as the principal seat, riding down to Penrose by post-chaise on the Tuesday afternoon and returning on the Saturday morning of his fortnightly week, and the household, by his own quiet instruction passed to Mr. Roxburgh in the South Colonnade on the Tuesday morning of the 5th of May, had begun to address Mrs. Penrose in the receiving room and the South Library, and the morning room and the long dining room as Madam. Mrs. Ainsley, the housekeeper of 55, her soft mid-brown hair shot with grey, pinned beneath the small white linen housekeeper's cap. Her clear, kind hazel eyes, her fair, pale, indoor skin, her composed, quiet mouth, her medium 5'5" upright in the plain, dark bombazine gown with the white linen apron and the chatelaine at her waist, took the instruction with a small private smile. Mrs. Traherne, the cook of 50, her soft grey-brown hair pinned beneath the large white linen cap, her warm, pale blue eyes, her fair, pink-cheeked round face, her medium 5'5", plump in the dark blue print cotton cook's gown beneath the large white linen apron and the white kerchief at the throat, took it with a brief, moist nod and a long pull at her own apron corner. There came a Wednesday afternoon of June in which the Bourbon roses opened upon the south wall of the rose garden, white and the palest pink trembling in the soft, warm air. The Duke and Mrs. Penrose walked the gravel walk after the evening dinner. She did not flinch when he stood close at the writing table on the morning he came in to consult her upon the parish coal. Her clear, soft, hazel-green gaze met his clear, cool storm blue and held 3 quiet seconds, and turned to the page. There came a Thursday afternoon of September in which the lime tree avenue dropped its first thin gold leaves upon the drive. The Duke and Mrs. Penrose walked it slowly to the iron gate at the foot and back. He gave her his arm at the rough place by the third lime where a root had lifted the gravel. She took it. She did not loose it again until they came up under the South Colonnade, the small parish school at the village schoolhouse, which she had begun in February, with 7 children of the cottagers, and which now stood at 14, met 3 afternoons of the week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, from 1 to 3 of the clock, and Mrs. Penrose taught the reading and the small sums in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, and Lizzie sat by the door with her sewing. The autumn came on. November the 3rd, 1818, the 2nd anniversary of the cold blue morning of the late Sir Jonathan's death, passed quietly. Mrs. Penrose was in her plain pearl grey, the white widow's cap put off these 6 months. The parish at St. Albans held a small evensong of remembrance for the late baronet at 5 o'clock. The Reverend Stowell, in the chancel in his black cassock and white surplice, the small silver crucifix at his neck, spoke briefly, 3 minutes only, on the text of the patient kindness of an old man to those who had been given into his keeping, and named the late Sir Jonathan Penrose, Baronet, of Penrose Hall, once, plainly in the close of his prayer. The household sat in the front pews of the household side. Mrs. Penrose sat in the family pew. The Reverend Stowell pronounced the blessing. The village came out under the first stars of a cold, pale blue evening. November the 4th, that morning yet to come, would dawn cold and pale blue. His Grace had ridden down on the Tuesday afternoon of the 3rd of November in his plain, dark walnut-brown country morning coat and his buff waistcoat with the small silver buttons and the buff breeches and the brown-topped boots and the white cravat properly tied, the heavy silver Hartfell signet on his right hand, and had taken his usual rooms at the Penrose Arms in the village from the keeper of the inn. He came up to the hall at 8 in the evening for dinner. Mr. Roxburgh received him at the great door. He was shown into the small dining room. They sat to 2 candles. He spoke little. Mrs. Penrose, in her plain, high-waisted, soft, pearl-grey wool morning gown, and her ivory silk slippers, the small gold mourning locket at her neck on its thin black silk ribbon, her late husband's plain gold band on her right hand, the long, rich, dark russet wavy hair, pinned smooth in its low chignon, with the small wisps at the temples, her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes steady, spoke little. Lizzie Wren attended at the sideboard with her usual quiet hand. Mrs. Traherne sent up a plain, clear soup, a small dish of partridge, an apple tart with cream. The 2 candles burnt steady. At 9:30, they read together in the South Library. The book was Persuasion, the same volume they had read 3 times now since the November of last year. The same plain, dark calf octavo, with the small ribbon of green silk for a marker, that had been the morning reading of Mrs. Penrose for many quiet months. Mr. Roxburgh trimmed the lamp. Mrs. Ainsley brought up the tea-tray at 9:30 and set it upon the small, round mahogany table between the 2 wing chairs. Lizzie sat at the door in her usual chair with her sewing on her knee. The Duke read the chapter in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. Mrs. Penrose took the book at the chapter's close and read on in her steady, soft, warm, low alto. The reading lasted an hour. At 11 o'clock, His Grace closed the book. He laid it upon the small round table beside the tea-tray. He inclined his half-inch deep. She inclined her quarter-inch. The candles were put out everywhere in the great house, but in the South Library. The household retired. Mrs. Ainsley carried the tea-tray down by the side stair. Lizzie went up by the back stair to her chamber under the eaves. Mr. Roxburgh made his last round of the bolts. The long-cased clock in the south colonnade struck the 11:15. At midnight, the Duke came back down by the side stair to the South Library alone. He carried no candle but the small one at the head of the stair, which he left in its sconce on the half-landing. He had taken from his coat pocket on the upper landing the small green calf commonplace book of his late father, which he had brought from Hartfell in his saddle-bag on the Tuesday afternoon, a worn small octavo, bound in pale green calf, rubbed at the corners, with the 3rd Duke's monogram in faded gilt upon the front board, and he laid it now upon the long, polished, walnut writing table. He took up the silver standish. He dipped the pen. He opened the book to a clean leaf. He sat to it. He drafted the proposal he intended to make at 11 the following morning. He wrote it through once in his careful, steady hand. 6 brief paragraphs, the first naming her as Mrs. Penrose and naming himself, the second the late letter of his mother, the third the 11 months and a day, the fourth his own settled mind, the fifth the freedom of her decision in either direction, and the freedom of her continuing at Penrose Hall on the same terms in either case, the sixth the closing sentence. He read it through. He put a small mark beside 2 lines. He wrote it through a second time, slightly amended at the third paragraph and the fifth, with the small marks corrected. He read it through aloud once to himself in the deep, clear, quiet baritone, the 34-year-old voice, steady upon every syllable, the South Library quiet but for the soft fall of the coals on the hearth. He closed the small green calf commonplace book of his late father. He set the pen back upon the silver standish. He turned down the 2 long candles upon the writing table to a single faint blue pointer-piece, and at length out. He stood a long minute at the great south window of the library. The heavy dark green velvet curtain held back at his shoulder by his right hand. He watched the cold blue Northamptonshire moon come over the bare beech avenue at the foot of the South Drive. The frost was upon the gravel. The branches of the avenue stood black against the pale silver of the sky. He did not weep. He did not pace. He stood. The long cased clock in the south colonnade struck the 1/4 midnight. He turned. He took up the small green calf commonplace book in his right hand, and he went up by the side stair, quietly, his step on the boards no louder than his breathing, to his rooms in the south wing of Penrose Hall. The small upper apartment above the south colonnade which he had taken since the previous spring when he came down, by Mrs. Ainsley's quiet arrangement with his Grace and Mrs. Penrose's quiet permission given to Mrs. Ainsley, with Lizzie Wren's quiet attendance upon his linen, and Mrs. Treherne's quiet feeding of him at the small table by the south window of his sitting-room. He laid the small green calf commonplace book upon the night-table by the bed. He extinguished the last candle by a brief, careful breath, and the small upper apartment of the south wing went dark. Beyond the leaded windows of the south wing of Penrose Hall, the cold, pale blue dawn of Saturday the 4th of November, 1818, began to come up over the bare beech avenue and the south rose garden and the long lime tree avenue and the plain pale green southerly fields of Northamptonshire. The morning of Saturday the 4th of November, 1818, came up over Penrose Hall in a cold, pale blue Northamptonshire light, very clear, very still, the small white frost only just lifted from the grass and the rooks abroad in the elms. The fire in the South Library, lit at 8:30, had settled by 11 into the small heart of seasoned beech. The long writing table at which the late Sir Jonathan had drawn his accounts for 40 years stood polished and bare. The leaded windows admitted the cold, pale blue light upon the worn Turkey rug. Mrs. Georgiana Penrose, née Broderick, 12 months and 1 day a widow, sat upright in the right-hand wing-chair beside the small fire. Her long, rich, dark russet wavy hair, deep, warm russet brown with copper lights where the morning fire crossed it, was pinned smooth in a low chignon at the nape with small wisps loosed at the temples. The white widow's cap had been put off after Easter and not put on again. Her clear, soft hazel-green eyes, warm autumn-leaf brown, shading to pale moss-green at the edges. Thick, dark lashes, very steady, were lowered upon the small cloth-bound volume in her lap. Her ivory fair English skin carried a faint warm rose flush at the cheekbones and faint freckles across the bridge of her nose. The small natural beauty mark just above the right corner of her upper lip moved minutely as she read. Her oval face was composed, her soft, well-shaped mouth at composed quiet, her slender 5'4" frame upright. She wore the plain, high-waisted, soft, pearl-grey wool morning gown that had succeeded the dove grey and black 6 months since, with a white lawn fichu at the throat. Upon her right hand was the plain gold wedding band of her late husband, transferred from the left at Easter, and at her neck, on a thin black silk ribbon, hung the small gold mourning locket. The volume in her lap was Persuasion, Lizzie Wren, 19. Soft mid-brown hair pinned in a neat low bun beneath a small white lace cap, clear hazel eyes, fair lightly freckled skin, oval face with a kind quiet mouth, slender 5'2" upright in plain dark grey print cotton with white linen apron and fichu, had taken the chair by the door with her sewing and bent her head over a fine seam. The brass clock struck 11. At the third stroke, Mr. Roxburgh, the butler, 60 thinning silver-grey hair brushed back, pale blue eyes finely lined, long kind face, clean-shaven, tall 6-foot thin upright in plain black butler's tailcoat, opened the door, inclined, and said, "His Grace, madam," and stood aside. Lord Hugo Alexander Ainsworth, 4th Duke of Hertford, came in. He was 35. He had turned 35 in March, and his thick, dark, walnut-brown, wavy hair, deep, warm walnut brown with bronze lights, brushed his coat collar at the nape, with the one premature streak of pure silver above the right temple, very plain in the cold light, and the one lock fallen across his brow. His clear, cool, storm-blue eyes, true cool slate blue with flecks of dark gold, were very steady upon her. His fair, faintly weathered skin was clean-shaven, the small, thin, pale scar, high above the left brow, kept from a 1810 fall on a slate roof at Hertford when rescuing a kitten, caught the morning light briefly. His strong, angular face was grave, his firm, grave mouth steady, the small dark mole at the right corner of his lower lip plain. He stood tall, 6'2", lean, broad-shouldered, in dark walnut-brown country morning coat, buff waistcoat with small silver buttons, buff breeches, brown-topped boots, white cravat, the Hertford ducal signet ring, heavy silver, 3 sheaves of wheat over a stone bridge, sat upon his right hand. Upon the smallest finger of his left hand was his late mother's small mourning ring, a thin gold band with a single jet stone. The black crape band had come off his left arm 3 days before. Her year of full mourning had ended on the 9th of October. He had kept the ring. Mr. Roxburgh closed the door upon them. Lizzie did not look up. Georgiana laid her hand upon the open page and lifted her eyes to him. He came across the worn turkey rug to the hearth in 3 even strides and stopped before her chair. He inclined. She inclined. He did not this morning take the chair opposite. He looked once at Lizzie, and Lizzie kept her eyes upon her seam. The small fire ticked. Then, with a steadiness 12 months in the practising, he went down upon one knee before her, his right hand resting open upon his knee, and spoke in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. "Mrs. Penrose, I have come every other week these 12 months past, on my mother's quiet asking and on my own. I had not understood until now what my mother had asked me to do. I had read her letter for the kindness of her letter. I came to Penrose because she had asked it. I stayed because I could not, having come, find any reason to go. I have loved you, Mrs. Penrose, with what dignity I could, and with what slowness your year required, since the morning I read aloud the line my mother had written. Now your year is out, and I am asking, with your maid present and on the proper terms, that you do me the honour of becoming my wife." He did not take her hand. He did not move from the kneel. The fire ticked once. The cold pale blue light came in upon the streak of pure silver above his right temple. Georgiana, who had stood at the foot of her late husband's stair on the cold pale blue morning of the 28th of October, the year before, in plain dove grey and black, in the belief that the new Duke had come to evict her, laid the small cloth-bound persuasion down upon her knee. The page, marked with a thin, dark green silk ribbon, did not turn. She closed the volume softly and set it upon the small rosewood table at her right elbow beside the unlit candle. She rose composedly without haste, her slender 5'4" upright before him, the morning fire behind her shoulder, the cold, pale blue light upon her ivory fair cheek, and the small natural beauty mark above the right corner of her upper lip. Her clear, soft, hazel green eyes were very steady upon his clear, cool storm blue. The plain gold wedding band of her late husband stayed quiet on her right hand. She said it in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, without a tremor. "Your Grace." "I shall." Hugo did not at once rise. He bent his head once briefly. The lock of dark walnut-brown hair fell forward over the streak of pure silver. And then he rose to his full 6'2", and his firm, grave mouth softened a 1/4 inch only. He took her right hand gently into his own, and bent and laid his lips once, lightly, upon the back of it above the plain gold wedding band of her late husband. He let her hand go, and stepped back the proper half-pace. Lizzie Wren had not lifted her clear hazel eyes from the white lawn upon her knee, but the corner of her kind, quiet mouth moved once. The brass clock struck the 1/4 past. Hugo said, "Madame, I am very much obliged. I shall, with your leave, speak to your household at 3:30 in the great hall." Georgiana inclined. "Your Grace," she said, "the household is in your honour." By 3:30, the household, Mr. Roxburgh upright at the foot of the broad oak stair, Mrs. Ainsley the housekeeper at his right, Mrs. Traherne the cook at his left, Lizzie Wren one step behind her mistress, had been summoned. Hugo and Georgiana descended together and stopped at the foot. The slanting, cold, pale blue light came in through the high, leaded south window upon them. Hugo spoke from the lower step in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, with no flourish. "Mr. Roxburgh, Mrs. Ainsley, Mrs. Traherne, Wren, Mrs. Penrose has done me this morning the honour of accepting my hand. We are to be married at St. Albans, Penrose Village, on the morning of the 28th of November. At Penrose Hall, she shall remain mistress in the proper sense. I thank each of you, by name, for the steadiness with which you have kept your mistress's house these 12 months past." Mr. Roxburgh inclined deeper than the proper inclining for a butler, bending the long, thin, upright figure slowly forward from the waist and holding it the breath of a moment longer than form required, and straightened, his pale blue eyes very bright. "Your Grace." "Madam, the household is honoured." Mrs. Traherne lifted the corner of her white linen apron to her warm, pale blue eye, and dabbed at it once, briefly, and let the apron fall again. Mrs. Ainsley, 55, soft mid-brown hair shot with grey beneath the small white linen housekeeper's cap, clear hazel eyes very kind, soft well-shaped mouth at composed quiet, gave Georgiana the small private smile that had no lift at the corners and no parting of the lips and no brightness of the eye to it that any but Georgiana would have read. The same small private smile she had given her young mistress on the cold blue morning after the late Sir Jonathan's death 2 years before, and on the morning of the 29th of October, the year before, when she had come out of the great drawing-room, knowing what the new Duke had said. Lizzie Wren kept her clear hazel eyes very bright upon the broad oak floor, and the corner of her kind, quiet mouth was openly moved. Lady Sophie Brockwell, with Sir Aubrey, came up from Brockwell Hall in Warwickshire on the Monday afternoon of the 6th of November, and was shown into the South Library at 4:30. She was 36, dark walnut-brown wavy hair, pinned in a smooth low chignon under a small white lace travelling cap, clear, cool storm-blue eyes, the mirror of her brother's, fair, faintly freckled skin, oval face with soft, well-shaped mouth, in habitual, easy warmth, slender, 5'7" upright in pearl grey silk travelling gown. She came across the worn Turkey rug, straight to Georgiana, who had risen, took both her hands in both her own, and looked at her. clear, cool, storm blue upon clear, soft hazel green, and said nothing for half a moment. Then her mouth moved once in the small, clean way that has nothing to do with pretty weeping, and a single bright drop ran down her cheek. She laughed through it, the small breath of a laugh her mother had once called a Brockwell laugh, not an Ainsworth one. "My dear," she said, "Mamma would have liked it. I have liked it. I am very much your sister now. Sir Aubrey Brockwell, 40, soft, sandy brown hair just brushing his collar, clear, honest hazel eyes, fair, lightly tanned, country skin, clean-shaven, kind, open face, tall, 6 foot lean, in plain dark green country coat, had come in with her. When his wife stepped back, he took Hugo's right hand in both of his own. He did not speak. He held it a moment and let it go, and inclined to Georgiana with his hazel eyes very kind. The banns were put up at St. Albans, Penrose Village, on the Sunday morning of the 8th of November, by the Reverend Stowell, 55, soft, sandy grey hair finely thinning at the crown, clear, honest hazel eyes behind small, gold-rimmed spectacles, fair, gently weathered skin, long, kind face, clean-shaven, medium, 5'10", thin, slight stoop, in his black cassock, with white linen surplice, white collar band, small silver crucifix on a black silk cord, in the small 12th century Northamptonshire parish church of pale Northamptonshire stone, low square Norman tower, plain oak pews polished by 7 centuries, narrow lancet windows admitting the cold, pale blue late autumn light. He read the banns in his clear, honest country voice, asked the cause and just impediment, waited the proper breath, and went on. On the second Sunday, the 15th of November, the village women began of their own accord to bring small bunches of late autumn chrysanthemums and dark bronze hothouse roses from the gardener's frames at Penrose Hall, and lay them at the foot of the altar rail. On the third Sunday, Reverend Stowell read the banns the third time, and there was no impediment. The morning of Saturday the 28th of November came up cold and pale blue over the parish church, the late autumn light very clear and very thin. Posies of dark bronze chrysanthemums and late autumn pale pink roses and dark green ivy, tied with white silk ribbon, had been pinned at every pew end by the parish women working from 7:30, and the cold pale blue light came in through the narrow lancet windows in long, thin, pale shafts upon the plain oak pews and worn flagstones of the centre aisle. The small silver crucifix at the Reverend Stowell's throat caught it as he stood at the altar. The household stood in the front pews, Mr. Roxburgh upright at the head of his pew, the small black silk mourning band for the late Sir Jonathan still upon his left arm, his pale blue eyes very bright, Mrs. Ainsley at his right in dark bombazine gown with white linen apron, the chatelaine of household keys at her waist, Mrs. Treherne beyond her, her warm pale blue eyes already moved. The village filled the back pews and the gallery, very still. Hugo stood at the chancel step in black superfine wedding tailcoat, high white starched cravat, white silk waistcoat with very faint silver pinstripe, black satin knee breeches, white silk stockings, buckled black evening shoes, the Hartfell ducal signet on his right hand, his late mother's small mourning ring kept upon the smallest finger of his left, a single sprig of dark bronze chrysanthemum at his lapel. The streak of pure silver above his right temple stood plain in the cold, pale blue light. His firm, grave mouth was steady. His clear, cool, storm blue eyes were upon the door. The door opened. Sir Aubrey came in first, by the breadth of a step, in black superfine, his clear, honest hazel eyes very kind, and at his right hand came Georgiana, slender 5'4" upright, in the high-waisted ivory silk wedding gown with short, puff sleeves and a single narrow row of small antique seed pearls embroidered at the hem, long plain ivory silk gloves to the elbow, her late mother's small pearl drop earrings, kept all 6 years of her widowhood, the heirloom Ainsworth wedding veil of 1781, pinned to a small coronet of dark bronze chrysanthemums and dark green ivy, and laid over her shoulders without hiding her face. Her long, rich, dark russet wavy hair was pinned smooth in the low chignon. Her clear, soft, hazel-green eyes were very steady upon Hugo at the chancel step. Her ivory fair cheek carried the faint, warm rose flush. The small natural beauty mark sat above the right corner of her composed mouth. The plain gold wedding band of her late husband sat upon her right hand still. The small gold mourning locket on its thin black silk ribbon was worn beneath the bodice. Lady Sophie came one composed pace behind in plain pale cream silk, with a small posy of dark bronze chrysanthemums in her gloved hand. They came along the worn flagstones of the centre aisle, in the long, thin, pale shafts of cold, pale blue light. Sir Aubrey gave the bride to Hugo at the chancel step. Hugo took her right hand, above the plain gold wedding band of her late husband, in his own. Reverend Stowell, in his clear, honest country voice, asked of each in turn, in the words of the old book, whether they would have the other. And each answered, "I will." Hugo's was the deep, clear, quiet baritone, very even. Georgiana's the steady, soft, warm, low alto. Hugo placed the new plain gold wedding band, a slim band, ordered from a London goldsmith on the Monday, upon the third finger of her left hand. She received it composedly and did not move the late Sir Jonathan's band on her right. Reverend Stowell spoke the pronouncement, "Those whom God hath joined together, let no man put asunder." He pronounced them man and wife. The wedding breakfast was laid in the great dining hall. The long polished oak table dressed with white linen and pale yellow candle wax, and small posies of dark bronze chrysanthemums and dark green ivy at every cover. Mrs. Treherne's wedding cake, a plain English fruit cake of the proper old country recipe, with pale Northamptonshire icing smoothed by her own hand on the Friday, stood on a silver salver at the centre, a small sprig of chrysanthemum at its top. Sir Aubrey rose at the appointed moment, his glass in his hand, and gave the country toast, long life and steady love, and a quiet hearth, and a kind year, without flourish, and the household and village glasses lifted with him. After the breakfast, Hugo took his wife's hand upon his arm, and they walked the slow length of the long gallery. The cold, pale blue Northamptonshire afternoon came in through the leaded windows in long, thin, pale shafts upon the dark, polished floor. They walked slowly, without speaking, the length of the gallery and back, and the length again. At the south end the second time, Hugo stopped before the late Sir Jonathan's portrait and inclined his head gravely. Georgiana inclined beside him. 13 months and 24 days later, on the cold blue Monday winter evening of the 27th of December, 1819, at 8:30, the South Library held its small steady fire of seasoned beech and its single-trimmed lamp upon the long polished walnut writing table, the heavy curtains drawn against the cold blue Northamptonshire night. The fourth Duchess of Hertford, Georgiana, now Lady Hugo Ainsworth, slender 5'4" upright, her long, rich, dark russet wavy hair pinned smooth in the low chignon with small wisps loosed at the temples, her clear, soft hazel green eyes very steady upon her book, her ivory fair English cheek carrying the faint, warm rose flush, the small natural beauty mark above the right corner of her composed mouth, sat in the right-hand wing-chair beside the fire. In plain high-waisted, soft, warm amber silk evening gown with white lace fichu at her throat, the small gold mourning locket on its thin black silk ribbon kept. The plain gold wedding band of her marriage to Hugo on her left hand, her late first husband, Sir Jonathan's plain gold wedding band, kept on her right. A small cloth-bound persuasion lay open upon her lap. She was reading aloud in her steady, soft, warm, low alto. Hugo sat opposite in his late father's wing chair, in black, superfine evening tailcoat, white cravat, white silk waistcoat, charcoal pantaloons, polished black Hessian boots, the Hartfeld ducal signet on his right hand, his late mother's small mourning ring on the smallest finger of his left kept. The streak of pure silver above his right temple plain in the lamplight. His clear, cool, storm-blue eyes, very steady upon her over the open book. His thick, dark, walnut-brown, wavy hair, brushing his collar with the one lock fallen across the brow. His firm, grave mouth softened a quarter-inch. There are stories that begin with a kiss. There are stories that begin with a vow. There are stories that begin with a knock, and stories that begin with a hired post-chaise, and stories that begin with a Tacitus on a stone bench, and stories that begin with a tortoiseshell cat asleep upon an embroidered cushion, and stories that begin with a brush dragging on a cold flagstone, and stories that begin with a letter read aloud in a Bath upper room. And there are, slowest, longest in the asking, of the most patient steadiness in the answering, stories that begin with a question put to the air at 10:30 on a cold, pale blue Northamptonshire Tuesday morning, when a young widow of 22 in plain dove-grey and black stood at the foot of her late husband's stair, and waited for the new Duke who had come, by his solicitor's letter, to take possession. And the new Duke, when he came not to take possession, but to read aloud, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, the letter his late mother had written to him 6 weeks before her own death, asking him to take this young widow into the family, rather than turn her out, for the sake of an old kindness her late husband had once done his mother in 1794, of which he had never been told. Such stories take a year and a day in the asking, and they are answered in the morning of November the 4th, in the year of our Lord, 1818, on the worn turkey rug of a south library at Penrose Hall, with the maid present and the candles unlit and the cold, pale blue Northamptonshire morning sun coming in through the leaded windows. And so on the cold, pale blue morning of the 28th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1818, in the parish church of St. Alban in Penrose village, under the soft Northamptonshire late autumn sun, Mrs. Georgiana Penrose née Broderick, who had stood at the foot of her late husband's stair on the morning of the 28th of October, the year before, in plain dove-grey and black, believing that the new Duke had come to evict her, became, by the patient, steady asking of the man whose late mother had written him a letter she did not live to see opened, the 4th Duchess of Hartfell, and the young widow that mother, in dying, had given him without speaking.